Repel 3 feet. Loren flicked his wand, and a beam of white magic shot from his applewood, striking the Grindylow lunging at him. The impact sent the little water demon spinning, and it sank, stunned, beneath the surface. Loren waded through the pond inside a transparent bubble and tapped it lightly. Pop! The bubble vanished. He stared at the pitted rock formation ahead, frowning. Whatever dark arts creature Professor Lupin had hidden in the reef, Loren had no intention of taking chances. He murmured an incantation and used transfiguration to seal the crevices in the reef. There were muffled thumps from within, but Loren strode across the rocks and through the soggy marsh without changing expression until he came to an old wooden box. Just as he was about to use a piercing charm on the lid, Professor Lupin appeared beside him, face clouded with a mixture of relief and resignation. "That's enough, Loren. Congratulations. You passed the Defense Against the Dark Arts practical with top marks." Loren smacked his lips, still a little disappointed. "Only 3 stages? I thought there'd be at least 5. Lupin's expression darkened. "There were 4, he snapped. "If you hadn't sealed that reef hole where the red cap was hiding, or if you hadn't noticed the light from the hinky punk in the swamp, or if you'd opened that box and faced the boggart, you would have found them all." "Professor, I was being cautious." Lupin cut him off, nudged him from the course, and called to the waiting students. "Next, Harry Potter." It was Thursday morning of exam week, and the Defense Against the Dark Arts practical was the second-to-last test for the 3rd years. Lupin's exam was the most unusual the students had seen in years, an outdoor obstacle course. They had to wade a deep pond thick with Grindylows, pass through a reef riddled with redcaps, make their way across a treacherous swamp without falling for a hinky punk's misleading light, then climb into an old box and banish a boggart. The stages had been thwarted for the others as soon as the course opened, because the first person to go through it was Loren Morgan. When Harry arrived and asked if there was anything he should watch out for, Loren had shrugged. "Watch for traps. Don't dawdle, just go straight." Harry did exactly that. He disarmed the Grindylow with Expelliarmus, sent a volley of redcaps flying, and kept moving through the swamp. When he reached the old box, he cast a powerful Expelliarmus at the lid. Lupin deflected the spell and asked, frowning, "Why didn't you open it, Harry?" "Loren told me to watch for traps," Harry said, scratching his head. "I thought it was safer to test it with a spell first." "And why did you use Expelliarmus the whole way through?" Lupin pressed. "It's what I do best," Harry admitted, glancing at the box. "Is that not a good idea?" Lupin exhaled. There wasn't a single correct approach to a defense exam. So long as students could handle the threats, the method didn't strictly matter. Still, he felt stifled by the uniformity of answers. "Full marks, Harry," he said finally, and shooed him out. "Next, Neville Longbottom." 10 minutes later, the Grindylow bobbed belly up in the pond. The red caps lay immobilized around the reef, and several hinky punks flickered in the mud. Lupin stopped Neville as he raised his wand to cast Stupefy at the box. "Neville," he asked in bewilderment, "why did you only use Stupefy?" "My parents taught me to end things with one solid spell," Neville replied timidly. "Stupefy incapacitates the enemy without causing worse harm." Lupin's eye twitched, as expected of the Longbottoms, reasoned, practical, a touch cautious. "Full marks. Next." Most of the rest of the class tackled the obstacles in the usual textbook way. Many opened the box and used Ridiculous to banish the boggart. Hermione, predictably, followed every step precisely and earned Lupin's rare, satisfied smile. Ron made a fair start, but was nearly led astray by the hinky punk's light before snapping himself back to safety. After defense, the students' final exam was divination. Hermione had dropped divination and gone to take ancient runes. She, like Loren, had arithmancy that evening. In the North Tower, a cluster of 3rd years sat along the spiral stairs to Professor Trelawney's classroom, hoping for one last-minute reading. Rumor had it, Trelawney would see them individually to tell whether they had the inner eye. Neville had Unfogging the Future open in his lap and was reading the chapter on crystal balls. "Did she really see anything in the crystal ball?" he asked, troubled. "Of course she didn't," Ron said, snorting. "Divination's the easiest exam. Say you saw terrible omens and you'll pass. By the way, how's your gran?" "She's fine," Neville said, bewildered. Loren leaned in. Professor Trelawney prophesied at the start of the year that your grandmother would be ill, remember? Neville swallowed. She did have a bad cold over Christmas. She's not in great health. Harry thought of the death omen Trelawney had declared for him and of the near disasters he had survived since. It's a trick, Ron scoffed. She got lucky once. Anyone could. The line outside the classroom moved slowly. Each student who came down the stairs declined to say what had happened inside. Finally, Neville relented. She said the crystal ball told her that if I told anyone, there would be a great catastrophe. Loren, Harry, and Ron were the last three. Ron was called in first and sent back out after a few minutes, blustering. He agreed to meet them in the common room and left. Harry hurried down the stairs and, breathless, haltingly told Loren a strange part of his reading. Professor Trelawney said something awful, Harry whispered. She said the Dark Lord will return with the help of a servant, stronger and more terrifying than before. And that when the light of the sun moves away from us, the dark arts will unleash a darkness. Loren felt a chill. He patted Harry on the shoulder. See you in the common room. Upstairs, a thin, tremulous voice called out, Loren Morgan. 382. The question was answered very well. I won't take the exam next time. It was already summer, but a stubborn fire still roared in the hearth. The little tower room was hotter than usual. A thick, heady, slightly acrid smell made Loren want to cough. He picked his way between the cluttered tables and chairs toward Professor Trelawney, who sat behind a large crystal ball. She wore oversized spectacles on her thin face, and a ridiculous number of chains and beaded necklaces hung from her neck, almost weighing her forward. Her expression was hazy. When she noticed Loren approaching, she blinked and murmured, Oh, forgive me, dear. So warm, I just nodded off. My dear, now look into this crystal ball, slowly, and tell me what you see. All right. Loren leaned forward and peered into the glass. A swirling white mist drifted inside. He glanced up casually. Professor, I heard you're the great-great-granddaughter of the famous seer Cassandra Trelawney. Trelawney lifted a surprised brow and primly straightened her chin. My child, you are a student who appreciates divination. I must applaud your knowledge. Yes, I am her great-great-granddaughter, and I alone have inherited her gift. The prophetic gift. Do you mean the inner eye? Yes, but it is more than simply the inner eye. The white mist inside the crystal ball churned without forming a clear image. Loren, still watching the fog, asked, What does a prophecy seen with the inner eye look like? Is it words, sounds, images, or something else? It is. Trelawney's answer trailed off. Her brow knitted as if puzzling over something. Professor? Loren prompted. Trelawney composed herself, put on an official expression, and chided, Focus on the exam. All right. Loren bent closer to the glass, concentrating. Professor, I read that some seers prophesy unconsciously. How does that happen? Of course. Trelawney hesitated a moment, then said, When the mind drifts far from the mundane, the inner eye sharpens, and the future can be seen with greater clarity. The clouds in the crystal ball slowed and began to gather, forming vague, indistinct shapes. Loren squinted. I see. A cloak, floating, and many running werewolves. Why are they running? What are they doing? Trelawney asked softly. Think. Maybe they're fleeing some great disaster, Loren guessed. A disaster terrible enough to scare werewolves. Trelawney's eyes lit up, and she began to write on the parchment on her lap. Good, very good. My child, your perception is keen. You might be seeing the seeds of anti-werewolf legislation, perhaps the ministry driving werewolves from their homes. Look closely. Do they manage to escape? Do they survive? Loren was a little surprised at how much had been read into his answer. He hedged. Some died. I think some of them did. Are you certain? Trelawney pressed. Did you see scattered corpses, dismembered limbs, splattered blood? Loren fell silent under her intense stare. Evening fell. Lights out was an hour away. The little wizards were returning from the arithmancy exam, shuffling toward their common rooms in a tired, dazed line. The exam had been open book, but brutal. One single question. Professor Vector had plucked an obscure wizard from a forgotten history volume, someone none of them had heard of, and asked them to reconstruct his entire life from clues like birth and death dates, name, and a palmistry chart. They were to deduce his upbringing, turning points, achievements, even the cause of his death. The question was clever and maddening. Several students left determined to drop the class. A few had even written dramatic, fictional biographies rather than submit a blank sheet. Loren and Hermione compared answers as they walked. Apart from the life achievements and the cause of death, their versions differed by dozens of Quidditch pitches. Hermione didn't argue, a rare thing. Arithmancy allowed for different end results so long as the method and reasoning were sound. Small discrepancies were expected. Loren popped a hazelnut chocolate into Hermione's mouth. The exam had been a drain. She needed something sweet. Hermione chewed, pursing her lips, and in an oddly muffled tone asked, "Loren, what did Harry say about the prophecy? What happened in divination?" "To be honest, I'm not sure either." Loren offered another chocolate and recounted the morning, the way he'd seen the mist and the images, and how Trelawney had reacted. "I headed back to the common room to meet you all after. Harry's probably already spoken with Dumbledore." "So Trelawney's a genuine seer?" Hermione's face showed suspicion and unease. "I think so." Loren shrugged. Hermione fell quiet, chewing the chocolate more slowly. For a moment, she doubted herself. The accusations Trelawney had made about her lacking talent and an inner eye nagged at her. But then, she remembered the showy theatrics and the obvious theatrics used in class, and convinced herself Trelawney was at least a poor teacher, if not a charlatan. She chewed on that thought until the taste of chocolate faded, popped another hazelnut piece into her mouth, and asked, "What do you think Dumbledore will do?" "He'll do what he deems necessary." Loren sounded indifferent. "Wasn't it always likely Lord Voldemort would return?" Hermione paused with the chocolate between her teeth, and something in that ringed true. She crushed the nut in her mouth and abruptly changed the subject. "Loren, how about we go to the United States over the holidays?" "Agreed," he said. "You don't want to know why I'm planning it?" she pressed. Loren pretended to think. "To learn American English?" Hermione snatched a chocolate back. "Don't look so smug. That line's from your joke book. I want to see how the International Confederation of Wizards runs things." "Oh," Loren nodded. "Professor Granger, minister-in-waiting." Hermione glared and grabbed the rest of the hazelnut chocolates from his hand. Bang! Boom! Even before they reached the portrait hole, the common room erupted with muffled thumps and shouts. Whatever had followed the exam left the room in such chaos that even a banshee would have been silenced. Explosions of noise and the high-pitched screams of students made their ears ring. Inside, Harry and Ron had already returned from the headmaster's office. Both looked perplexed, their faces carrying a complicated mix of exhaustion and stunned confusion. Dumbledore had apparently spoken for nearly 2 hours, a long, winding account of the past year, prospects for the next, and even Professor Lupin's uncertain future. Harry and Ron had listened, but it was clear they'd heard only fragments. They came back with eyes wide and minds still buzzing, as if the sugar rush of too much information had left them dazed. Loren and Hermione sat down beside them. Hermione peered at Harry. "Did you go to the headmaster to tell Dumbledore about Professor Trelawney's prophecy? What did he say?" Harry blinked, came back from whatever he'd been thinking about, and told them slowly, holding silence between the sentences as if weighing each word. When he finished, he wore a complicated expression. "Dumbledore didn't really say anything." Ron snorted. "He said a lot. He just made it sound like nothing." They traded whispers about all the odd, roundabout things adults said. Ron finally grumbled, indignant. "That's how adults are. They treat us like kids and never tell us anything. Harry heard the prophecy first. He should tell us." Loren shrugged toward Hermione as if he'd expected exactly that. At that moment, Neville's voice rang out from nearby. "You're back at last. Phew. Hurry up. I brought out the rest of the snacks." They turned. Neville appeared behind a small mountain of sweets, his robes barely visible as he teetered under the load. With a theatrical flop, he set it down and candies clattered across the table. Pink coconut ice pops sparkling, licorice wands, boxes of cockroach clusters, and a scattering of fizzing whizbees that filled the air with a sweet tang. "Wow," Ron breathed, eyes lighting up. He plunged his hand into the pile. "I don't care. Dumbledore could be in here announcing a plan to take down Voldemort, and I'd still have to eat all of these first." Neville grinned as Loren offered Hermione a box of cockroach clusters. Hermione pushed it away with a face of disgust. Loren offered it to Harry. He plucked a few out, chewed with a grimace, then sighed contentedly as the sugary juices burst in his mouth. Something in him loosened. He leaned back on the sofa and let out a long breath. "Third year is over, isn't it? To be precise, there's still a week left," Hermione said, officiously. Harry ignored the correction and kept sighing. "Next year will be fourth years." Crunch, crunch. Loren bit into a cockroach cluster. Ron and Neville snapped off licorice wands. Even Hermione tried a fizzing Whizbee. The steady chorus of munching filled the common room. Harry paused, watching them, then said decisively, "It's amazing to think we've already spent 3 years at Hogwarts and hardly noticed." "Loren, want to play cards?" Seamus called as he strode over. "It's no fun playing with them. They never play properly. They just want to see me get blown up." Dean followed, arms full of exploding snap and gobstones, his voice audible over Harry's nostalgia. Loren and Ron immediately agreed. "Count me in," Ron said. Harry managed a rueful look as a space on the table was cleared for cards. Seamus performed exactly as usual. After a couple of rounds, he was blown up and wailed that he couldn't take it, then retreated in a huff to gobstones. Even Hermione joined a few rounds. With exams over, a year's worth of homework, memorizing, and practicals behind them, this felt like the most relaxed time of the year. No one had grades in front of them yet, no summer work assigned, just laughing, complaining, and snacks. It wasn't until after midnight that the noise tapered. Ron carefully stacked the cards and slipped them back in their box, sighing with the relief of an explosion-free cleanup. He turned to them. "Loren, Hermione, do you have any plans for the holidays?" Loren fed Hermione a potato chip and looked at Ron, mildly puzzled. "Why don't you ask Harry?" "I've already told him," Harry said. "I have to stay with my aunt and uncle for a month. It's what I promised Dumbledore." "But last year you ran away," Hermione gestured, reminding him of the rift with the Dursleys. Harry only shrugged. "They gave me Christmas presents, the money and a card. I take that as a sign we're at least patched up. If everything goes well and I don't explode another relative by accident, I can probably stay on Privet Drive until school starts. If not, I might spend some time at the Leaky Cauldron. I don't mind staying there." "You can't stay at the Leaky Cauldron." Ron wrapped an arm around Harry and shook him. "You have to come with us to the Quidditch World Cup." "World Cup?" Harry blinked, adjusting his glasses instinctively. "You'll see when the time comes," Ron said triumphantly. Then he turned to the others. "And you two, Loren and Hermione, my parents have been wanting to invite you to stay with us for ages." "Sorry, Ron." Loren popped a butterbeer fudge into Hermione's mouth. "This summer, we're planning to go to the United States for the International Confederation of Wizards." Ron waved that away. "That doesn't clash. The Confederation will be over before the World Cup starts. My dad, he's head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office. He'll be going to the Confederation too. He might even speak as a representative." Loren blinked at the image of Mr. Weasley addressing the International Confederation, then smiled. "Please thank your parents for the invitation." Neville, who had been quietly munching, suddenly spoke up. "My parents are going to the United States too. They're going to try to capture Bellatrix Lestrange." "Capture Bellatrix?" Ron's eyes widened. "Just the two of them? She's dangerous. They should be careful. Get Aurors in America to help at least." Hermione's face tightened. "Neville, please be careful. Bellatrix and her master, Lord Voldemort, are probably over there. There could be werewolf wizards and other Death Eaters. Maybe even help from Crabbe's family." The atmosphere grew heavy. Everyone looked at Neville. Ever since his parents had come round from their long illness, Neville had changed so much that it was startling. Confident, capable, first to conjure a fully formed Patronus, the first among them to complete animagus work. They had all seen him blossom, and none of them wanted him to lose that strength. Loren took a sip of chilled pumpkin juice and thought about it. The Longbottoms were experienced Aurors and respected members of the Order of the Phoenix. They were strong. Bellatrix would be no pushover, but neither were they inexperienced. Years ago, the ambush that had left the Longbottoms badly hurt involved their being exposed while the enemy lay hidden, the sort of mistake that could be fatal in unfamiliar territory. He wondered whether Dumbledore knew of their plan and whether he would try to stop them from going in alone. Neville pressed his lips together, then, after a long silence, said quietly, Thank you. I'll tell them what you've said, and I'll tell my grandmother too." At that, everyone seemed to let out the breath they'd been holding. Seamus and Dean, who had been joking and brash a moment before, sat a little closer to the wall and suddenly very small. They exchanged a quick glance, then looked away. Outside the common room, the castle settled. Inside, the last murmurs died. They finished the snacks, squared the card deck, and one by one drifted off toward their dormitories. The quiet felt heavier than the laughter had, full of promises and worry both, and of a summer that would likely change more than one of them. 384. A little expert in committing suicide. After midnight, some of the candles in the common room had burned low, so the younger students produced their own light. Bluebell flames tucked into glass bottles threw a soft, warm glow. An odd crystal sphere reflected the full moon. Even sparkling coconut ice lanterns were levitated into the air. The older students were less restrained. There were crude torches and books being used as lamps by the 6th and 7th years. A hush ran through the room when someone produced a dark arts lighting charm that made a candle visible only to the holder. There were many sources of light, but they were scattered and uneven, and the common room became a haze of shadow and glow that lent everything a dreamlike air. Some first years were already dozing. Reluctant to go up to the dormitory, they curled on sofas and in corners and watched the strange scene drowsily. Under the spell of that atmosphere, voices dropped. George and Fred stopped cracking jokes and began trading ghost stories, making the little witches jump sometimes. The boys were frightened too, Lee Jordan included, though his dark complexion hid the paling of his features when he tensed. Loren munched sticky nougat, several pieces jammed in his mouth to soften, spread evenly across his teeth before he bit down, then spent a long time letting it stick and loosen. The whole ritual gave him an odd sense of accomplishment. When he finally swallowed the last bit near a sore wisdom tooth, he pressed his tongue to his gums and settled back, leaning his head against Hermione while savoring pumpkin juice. He was too tired to do anything but rest. Hermione looked at him with helpless disapproval. She still couldn't understand why he did it. The crunching had made her teeth ache. "This is terrible for your teeth," she said. "You might get cavities." Loren's mouth was too full and tired to speak properly. He only hummed. "Even if you brush, you can still get cavities." Hermione scooted a little so he could rest his head on her shoulder more comfortably. "And your wisdom teeth. If they come in crooked, you'll need them taken out." Loren shoved another piece of nougat into her mouth to shut her up. Hermione's own teeth were slightly stuck, so she let it go. After all, he was a wizard. Pulling a tooth was nothing compared to most of the things they did. Neville sat a little lost, staring off into space. Harry and Ron were talking about the Quidditch World Cup, and Seamus and Dean whispered for so long no one could make out what they were saying. "I heard Colin's little brother is starting next year," Seamus said suddenly. "He's old enough, and they say he's shown some magic." "Another Creevy?" Ron laughed. "That's brilliant, Harry. You're going to have another fan. How many autographs did you hand out this year? Enough for the kid to make an album, right?" "Oh no," Harry moaned and clapped a hand to his forehead. Loren popped up. "Harry, ask Colin where he bought his camera. What brand is it? I want one. And the developing solution, too." Harry blinked. "What do you want a camera for?" "To take pictures of scenery, of course," Loren replied. "Not that I wouldn't take pictures of you, the famous savior, the boy who lived, the great Harry Potter." Harry buried his face in a cushion in a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. Laughter and chatter continued until 3 or 4 in the morning, by which time most of the younger students were too exhausted to stay awake. One by one, they drifted upstairs. The common room emptied. Just before he left, Loren wobbled theatrically to his feet, acting unbearably sleepy, and grabbed what looked like a cluster of candied nuts, waving it toward Hermione. Smack! Hermione slapped his hand away. "You've given me candy all night, and now you want to feed me a candied thing?" Loren chuckled, murmured, "What's wrong with trying it?" Then suddenly leaned in and pecked her on the lips before dashing up the stairs. By the time Hermione recovered, he was already gone. She smiled as she watched him disappear around the corner, amused rather than annoyed. Loren pushed the dorm room door open. His roommates were washing and changing into pajamas. Ron's eyes were half shut. He groped for the wardrobe door and fumbled, walking with his lids down until he bumped a bed frame and opened them a slit to make sure he was still moving in the right direction. By the time Loren had washed and returned, everyone was in bed. "Harry, wake me tomorrow for the animagus ritual," Ron mumbled, already drifting off. "Got it," Harry answered, voice as sleepy as Ron's. Loren dragged himself to his bed and flopped back, but the next thing he knew, he wasn't in bed at all. He was in the bright, silent library. He had stayed up too late and felt a little lightheaded, so he planned to use the enchanted book to restore his energy. Flamel wasn't at the usual spot. He must be in the boiler room. Loren found a chair and lay down, his consciousness thick with sleep. 2 hours later, he woke inside the enchanted book, clear-headed and buzzing with energy. He stretched and greeted an old man reading nearby. "Morning, Flamel. When did you get here?" "I forget," Flamel murmured, absorbed in an art history volume. Loren slipped out of the book for a moment to check the sky. It was still dark, a deepening blue, with time before sunrise. He couldn't sleep anymore, and the summer blankets weren't as comforting as winter ones. With nothing better to do, he dove back into the book and began to practice magic. 10 minutes later, the library was transformed. Bookshelves seemed to drown in a churning sea of flame as thousands of vicious fiendfire creatures ripped through the aisles. The flaming beasts, each exuding destructive magic, left only scorched ruin in their wake. Loren hovered above the inferno, waving his wand like a conductor and directing the riotous fire into the shapes of animals and figures that moved where he gestured. Flamel watched without expression. He had seen fiendfire many times and was no longer shocked. Then Loren put his wand away and looked pensive. "Flamel," he asked, "how long do you think a salamander could last in fiendfire?" "You're not planning to," Flamel began, turning slowly to him. He remembered that 2 months ago, Loren had managed a salamander transformation, and that the enchanted book's special salamander magic let him move through ordinary flames until his magic ran out. Loren gave a small, almost sheepish chuckle, dropped his wand, curled into himself in midair, shifted into salamander form, and tumbled down into the rolling waves of fire. The flames engulfed him, and the salamander collapsed into ash in an instant. 385. Fortune favors fools. When Loren folded the fantastic book shut, the sky outside the castle had gone a pale, fish-belly white, and a faint golden light shimmered over the distant mountains. It was only 5 or 6 in the morning. The early summer sun was just beginning to rise. His 4 roommates were still fast asleep. The dormitory was silent except for Neville's long, steady breaths. He rarely snored anymore, now that he'd lost weight and gotten a bit stronger. Loren slipped out of bed and padded over to Harry's. "Harry, Harry," he whispered. Harry's eyelids fluttered, his brow furrowed, and he blinked blearily, still half drowned in sleep. His body woke faster than his mind. Anyone who'd slept for only 3 hours could be expected to take a moment to boot up. Loren waved his hand in front of him. "Wake up, Harry. Wake up. Where is this? Oh, the dormitory. Who's that? Oh, Loren." Harry's gaze slowly sharpened, and his thoughts came back online. Loren leaned closer, voice low and cheerful. "Congratulations, Harry. The surgery was a success. You're a girl now." Harry's eyes narrowed, his pupils contracting, and he shot upright in the 4-poster bed. Once his mind caught up, he let out a long breath of relief that turned into exhaustion. He looked at Loren, incredulous. "Loren, do you think this is funny?" Loren grinned and went to the basin to wash. "Ron isn't awake yet. Wake him." Harry watched him go, then swung his head to the next bed and looked at Ron. A faint smile tugged at his lips. After Loren had brushed his teeth and splashed his face, he returned to find Harry and Ron quietly chanting the animagus words. Harry's smile was satisfied. Ron looked annoyed, shooting suspicious glances between them. "Amado, animo, animado, animagus," they murmured. "Harry, what are you doing?" Loren leaned in and whispered, "Isn't this hilarious?" Harry paused mid-chant and then, thinking for a moment, said, "Ron's from a wizarding family. He wouldn't understand surgery or turning into a girl, so I told him the magic was successful and he'd turned into a little witch." "Hey," Loren laughed. "Resourceful." Harry only smiled and closed his eyes, concentrating on the chant. Ron's suspicion flickered, but his mind was slow at the moment. He couldn't pin down what felt wrong. With the OBULs over, the school year had ended, and even the weather seemed to celebrate. June brought clear, washed blue skies and sun-warmed grass. The younger students, freed from lessons, wandered the grounds with pints of iced pumpkin juice, sprawled beneath trees watching the leaves stir, or sat by the lake watching the giant squid drift lazily on the surface. Fred and George were especially lively, racing about in a delirium. Now they were no longer chained to revision. Percy, having finished his NBTs, had emerged from exam-induced neuroses and found himself with time to spare, though, unlike his two youngest brothers, he didn't feel quite as euphoric about it. Professor Lupin's exam room had turned into a sort of playground. The students teased Grindylows and red caps in the reef caves and kept going back, even if it left them with a black eye. Several of them had managed to summon corporeal patronuses after the stress of finals. Ron's took the form of a hound. It wasn't majestic, but he loved it all the same and often let it run with Fang through the forest. 5 days after exams finished, Angelina Johnson, the new Gryffindor Quidditch captain, called the team together for a final practice on the pitch. "As usual," she shouted, 20 laps around the pitch, then split into 2 for defensive counterattack drills. The team set off without a word. Angelina turned to Harry. "You'll train with Ginny as seekers, and then return your brooms to the storeroom." "Yes, Captain," Harry answered, biting down on the sting in his throat as he tried not to look up at the old captain in the stands. The others tried to keep their faces straight, but their eyes drifted toward Oliver Wood anyway. They expected some sort of speech, something Wood always said before a big match. Practice ran hard and serious, but when they finally returned to the stands at the end, Wood was gone. Angelina kept up her usual scolding of Ron and Cormac McLaggen for a dropped quaffle as they left the pitch. Her voice was the same as always, businesslike and a little sharp. Harry walked toward the broom storeroom, broom handles bundled under his arm, Ginny close behind. "The first time I had a flying lesson," he told her, "I nearly broke Malfoy's arms, legs, and a few ribs. Madame Hooch said it was fine, but I thought I'd be expelled. I kept thinking about how I'd go back to face my aunt and uncle. Then Professor McGonagall handed me to Captain Wood. That was the first time I met him." He rambled on about missing his first practice because of the Mirror of Erised and how Wood had practically used him as a quaffle, flinging him toward the scoring ring. Ginny listened in silence, holding her broom, watching his damp hair clump against his forehead. She felt closer to him somehow, seeing that less polished side of Harry, and she followed him into the storeroom. Harry stopped short. "Wood!" Ginny didn't have time to avoid him and bumped into Harry's back, then caught herself and looked up. Oliver Wood stood by the storeroom door, smiling as if he'd been there a while. That evening, Loren and Hermione returned to the Gryffindor common room after spending the day under a tree reading palms and found the room in a bustle. A crowd had gathered around Colin Creevey, who was photographing the Quidditch team. Good-naturedly pressed into the group, Loren was grabbed by George. "Isn't this our team's unofficial member?" he shouted, hauling Loren over. Fred dragged him to the far right of the team photo. The trophies from the trophy room had been moved to the center of the common room. Harry and Ron wore the special contribution medals they'd been awarded for dealing with the basilisk. "Smile," Colin commanded, and the team posed in scarlet robes. Harry and Wood were in the center. Ron tried to step toward the middle, but Fred and George had other ideas and plucked him back after 2 steps. Click, the picture was taken. Everyone clustered around Colin's camera to look at the image. Ron stared at it and his pupils widened. In the photo, everyone smiled and waved except him, who looked squashed and miserable with the twins laughing at his side. He protested loudly. "Retake it! I want to retake!" "Why retake it?" George grinned, using his height to shove Ron aside. "This is perfect. We'll put this up in the trophy room so students 5 or 10 years from now will know how brightly Gryffindor shone." Fred nodded, mock fainting with excitement. Ron, red with fury, shouted, "It's your fault! I'll get you! You bastards!" They tore around the common room in a chase, shoes thudding on the stair treads. When Ron nearly caught the twins, they'd suddenly speed up. When they seemed about to escape entirely, they'd pretend to gasp for breath and make some sly remark to needle him. Ron knew they were teasing, but he chased them anyway. Loren lingered by Colin and talked cameras for ages. Lens Zilm, developing solutions, aperture settings, and composition. The common room buzzed with noise until dusk settled and the candles flickered to life. Finally, the chatter thinned. Ron flopped down next to Harry, out of breath, but satisfied that he'd landed a few good blows on Fred and George. In his mind, they were now irreparably cursed. Harry, Loren, Hermione, and Neville spoke of animagi in easy conversation. Harry didn't take the topic too seriously. He expected he might fail his tests again. Ron, catching his breath, asked, "Harry, what did Wood say to you when he came back?" Harry hesitated. Loren, taking a calm sip of tea, said slowly, "Wood told me that when Angelina graduates, he'll let Harry take over as captain." "What?" Ron's eyes went wide. "You, captain!" "Just kidding. You'll be captain," Loren amended, then paused. Ron's confusion showed plainly. "No, really. Wood said you have a good sense of overall planning and you understand tactics. Since you're a keeper, you could take over after Angelina graduates," Loren finished matter-of-factly. Harry only sipped his tea and looked at Ron with a complicated expression, happiness edged with a little guilt. Neville fidgeted as if he wanted to say something, and Hermione pretended to study the tea leaves in her cup. Ron, torn between hope and disbelief, sat in stunned silence for a long while, turning the news over in his head until Loren finally said, "Why don't you go ask Wood to be sure?" Ron leapt up and hurried off toward the stands. When Harry confessed to Loren in a low voice, "Wood didn't mention the captaincy to me. He just told me to help Angelina build the team," Loren raised an eyebrow. "Then why didn't you correct Ron?" Harry's expression flickered. He didn't answer, and the unspoken mix of joy and guilt hung between them. A few minutes later, Ron came back, bounding over with his arm thrown around Harry's shoulders, patting him repeatedly. "You won't believe it. Wood says I can be captain," he said, grinning. "He's already talked to Angelina. If I prepare tactics and become a better keeper, he said I could take over in the future." Ron popped an every flavor bean into his mouth, and to his surprise, liked the earwax flavor. Harry's face went a little strained. Neville and Hermione shot Loren questioning looks. Loren watched Ron's exuberant grin and fell silent. Had he started something that turned out real? He couldn't help the small inward smile. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was what people meant by fools getting lucky. 386. Goodbye, Professor Lupin Thursday. With 3 days left until the end of term, it was another bright, sunny day. The defense against the dark arts professor's office door stood open. The room was mostly empty. The books had been taken down from the shelves, leaving only the student grade books, archived assignments, and a few handwritten notes on teaching progress for each year. Remus had left those for whoever took the post next. On the desk sat half a bottle of ink and a somewhat ruffled quill leaning against its mouth, looking forlorn. The tanks that once housed small creatures like Grindylows and Kappa were empty. Beneath them was Remus's old leather suitcase, open on the floor and overflowing with odds and ends and a small amount of clothing. Remus pressed the tea caddy into the pile of clothes and wrestled the suitcase closed. A soft knock sounded at the door. Remus looked up to see a few young wizards crowded at the doorway, faces gentle. He smiled. "Good morning. Harry, Loren, Hermione, Ron. If you're here about your grades, I'm afraid I must apologize. Professor McGonagall and I agreed we'd only reveal them on the last day of term." Harry and Ron felt a lump in their throats and could not speak. They had known for months that Professor Lupin would be leaving, but when the moment to say goodbye actually arrived, sadness hit them all the same. Hermione's voice trembled as she whispered, "I heard you're leaving soon, Professor." "Yes," Remus said, smiling. "I asked Headmaster Dumbledore to arrange a carriage. It should be waiting outside the school gates." He reached into the leather pocket on his left chest and pulled out a small, dark, scaly pendant, shaking it a little. "Don't worry. I've packed sandwiches from the kitchens, chicken legs, Hagrid's rock cakes, and a sack of sweets from the headmaster. And with that little scale Loren gave me, I won't be hungry for months." He tried to joke, but it landed thinly. Even Hermione had to swallow hard. Loren spoke softly. "Professor, won't you wait until after the end-of-year feast? Lots of people want to thank you at the feast. Do tell them for me." Remus smiled. This year of teaching has been a real pleasure, and please tell everyone I'm sorry I can't say goodbye at the feast in person." He finished stuffing the last items into his suitcase and stood up. He looked around the office the way he had when he first arrived a year ago. Everything felt as if it had been yesterday. He drew a slow breath, as if trying to imprint the scent of Hogwarts into his memory. Then he turned to the students. "Would you mind seeing me out? To the school gate, perhaps?" "Of course," Harry said at once, a rush of panic underneath his words. If this walk was all the farewell they would have, he would regret it forever. The others nodded. Remus picked up his battered suitcase. After they left the office, he nudged the door shut with his toe. Classes were over, and the castle was almost empty. They walked out together. June's sunshine beat down, bright and sharp, as if it could reach into their chests and leave them hollow. Their shoes whispered over the loose turf. The air smelled of unfamiliar blooms, green grass, and warm earth. Remus seemed to relish such clear days. He was the first to break the silence. "Harry, do you remember the boggart?" "Of course," Harry replied quickly, an edge of tension in his face as he rattled off the explanation. A boggart is a shape-shifting creature that looks into a wizard's mind and becomes their greatest fear. You defeat it with the boggart banishing charm, ridiculous, which forces it into a form the caster finds ridiculous. And the more people there are, the easier it is to face because it doesn't know what to change into. "Relax, Harry," Remus laughed. "I only wanted to remind you to practice ridiculous. You always use the Patronus charm against the Dementors that a boggart might turn into. Don't forget there's a simpler way. Maybe one day your worst fear won't be Dementors anymore. Don't be helpless when you meet a boggart." Harry's tension eased at the advice, leaving behind a quiet disappointment. "I will, Professor." "Don't call me Professor anymore. I've resigned, remember?" Remus glanced toward the greenhouses. "Loren, I saw your Patronus on the Hogwarts Express, but I haven't seen you produce it at school. Are you reluctant to draw attention?" "Yes, Professor," Loren admitted. "Actually, you can control a Patronus's size with a few small tricks. I left a notebook in my room. Changing a Patronus's size, using its glow to hide its shape, sending messages with a Patronus. Try these," Remus said, not hurried. "If you get stuck, ask the other teachers for help." They talked about Patronuses until they reached the part of the path where the whomping willow loomed to their right. Remus glanced at the tree a few times, but walked on without slowing. "Hermione," he said, "you're very bright and devoted. I have little to teach you, but in practice you lean too heavily on what's written in books. That may limit you. Be a little more flexible. Don't be imprisoned by the text." "I will, Professor," Hermione said. "Ron?" Remus looked at the red-haired boy, who met his gaze with a worried frown, and couldn't help but chuckle. "You're more gifted than you think. Stop measuring yourself against them. They have weaknesses you don't. You need to find your own strengths." Ron looked up, crestfallen. "I just can't find any." Remus laughed outright. "At least a few things you're better at than all three of them." "Where?" Ron asked, hopeful. Remus raised an eyebrow, then changed the subject. "I'll tell you next time we meet." "Professor!" they all shouted together, and laughter broke the heavy farewell as if someone had thrown open a window. Loren took the lead, recounting incidents from the year. How Kappa were like water monkeys, how only the foolish were tricked by hinky-punks, how redcaps preyed on the weak, until they reached the school gates. A number of professors were already waiting beneath the gateposts topped with winged pig sculptures. Dumbledore stood with his hands folded beneath his beard, smiling as they approached. Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, and Professor Sprout were talking nearby. Even Professor Snape stood on the edge, cold and reserved. Hagrid was beside the carriage at the roadside, murmuring to the horses. Remus set his suitcase down and went to say his goodbyes to the staff. Out of courtesy, the students hung back. They watched Remus smile and speak warmly to the first four professors, but when he reached Snape, his expression tightened under that frosty stare. The students lowered their heads, pretending to stare at their shoes but straining to hear. They could not make out the words, though they saw Snape sneer once, then unroll a black cloth and hand a wrapped object to Remus. Remus nodded and accepted it. About 10 minutes later, Remus picked up his suitcase again. "All right, goodbye, Harry, Loren, Hermione, Ron," he said with a smile. I believe we'll meet again. I know you do too." He gave them a last nod and walked briskly through the gate. After a few words with Hagrid, he climbed into the carriage and it pulled away. On that sunny day, the finest and most satisfying defense against the dark arts professor they'd had left Hogwarts. The carriage's wheels rattled over the gravel road, the noise making its interior feel even lonelier. Faces of many other students drifted through Remus's thoughts. Neville Longbottom, Seamus Finnigan, the Weasleys, Luna Lovegood, Cho Chang, Padma Patil, Hannah Abbott, Justin Finch Fletchley, Ernie Macmillan, the Greengrass sisters, Theodore Nott, Draco Malfoy. He wanted to give each of them one last piece of advice. He would have to save it for another time. The carriage left the open countryside and entered Hogsmeade. It wound along the quiet street, turned down a narrow lane beside the post office, and stopped in front of a small bar. The place looked very old and smelled faintly foul. A weathered wooden sign hung on rusty brackets above the door, a severed pig's head, its white cloth stained with blood. Remus climbed out with his suitcase. A short, stout wizard wearing a black pointed hat and a black face mask came briskly to meet him. He was bearded, with long, messy ginger hair peeking out beneath his hat. He walked with short, bowed legs and carried the unmistakable smell of smoke and drink. "Remus Lupin," the man hissed, his voice low and edgy. "We haven't seen each other in years, have we? I never thought you'd be back as a professor. Dumbledore's good to you, isn't he? He never remembers people like us unless he needs something. The last time I saw you was in Albania." "Don't say it like that, Mundungus." Remus's face remained impassive. He glanced up at the pig's head sign. "Why here? I thought you were banned from this place since 1975. "That's why I don't dare show my face," Mundungus said, glancing over his shoulder as if worried the bar owner might spot him. "Come in quick. I've got everything ready. You're heading to the States, right?" "What did Dumbledore tell you?" Remus asked as they went inside. "He didn't tell me anything, just said to prepare a portkey and a false identity." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mutton. The few bay windows were smeared with grime, letting in little light. Stubby candles guttered on rough wooden tables. Many of the customers' faces were obscured by hoods or shadow. Mundungus seemed almost ordinary in comparison. As they passed, the bar owner glanced their way, and Mundungus flinched. Fortunately for him, the man ignored them, and Mundungus led Remus up to a dirty, cramped room on the second floor that reeked of stale food. Remus set his suitcase down and paced, checking for listening charms or hidden detectors. Mundungus produced a handful of passports and ministry IDs from under his coat and slapped them on the table. "Pick one," he said. "I thought about making you an American identity, but you can't do an American accent. Wizards and muggles mix a lot there. You'll need these." Remus sorted through the papers slowly. Mundungus kept jabbering. "Watch how you move. The portkey could be detected when you arrive. Don't get mixed up with the American Magical Congress. With the International Confederation meeting there, their patrols are tight as bloodhounds." He peered at Remus. "Tell me why you're going. Maybe I can give some tips." "No need," Remus answered without looking up. "All right." Mundungus shrugged. "I don't know why you're going, but if you get caught, just give your identity for Dumbledore's sake. They won't pursue it all the way." "I understand." Remus folded the documents into his pocket. "Leave the portkey. You can go." "Leave it with you?" Mundungus exclaimed, eyes wide and watery. "I thought, oh well, fine." He muttered under his breath as he dug out a battered shovel-shaped object from beneath his coat and placed it on the table. "I was hoping to do a bit of smuggling with it later." "Goodbye, Remus. May Merlin bless you." Mundungus pushed the door open and left, grumbling about Dumbledore's stinginess as he went. The short, bow-legged figure vanished down the stairs. Remus shook his head and murmured, "Still as unreliable as ever." He picked up the shabby shovel-shaped portkey and, without intending to use it, slipped it into his suitcase. The whole errand from Hogwarts to the bar had been a deliberate ruse. If anyone tried to trace him, they'd start with Mundungus and run in circles. Remus planned to apparate to the border and cross into the United States by ferry. He had packed plenty of mandrake leaves and the improved wolfsbane potion in a cloth bag. He had time to investigate the werewolf conspiracy and to free some of his kin ahead of schedule. With a soft pop in the air, Remus Lupin disappeared from the second-floor room. 5 minutes later, the bar owner saw through Mundungus's disguise, gave him a sound beating, and threw him out into the street. After lunch, Hagrid's hut sat at the edge of the forbidden forest. Over the years, the half-giant had stamped a wide path from the castle into the trees, circling the simple wooden dwelling and carving out several flat plots of vegetables. The biggest was the pumpkin patch, which every year produced pumpkins larger than a person. George and Fred had always nursed the idea of levitating the largest one into the Gryffindor common room as a Halloween jack-o'-lantern, but it had never worked out. The sun was at its hottest after noon, but a steady, cool breeze from the forest made the air pleasant. Hermione sat on the third step, legs naturally extended, an old notebook open in her lap, her expression quiet and focused. Sunlight filtered through the treetops and made her fair cheeks and neck glow. The notebook had belonged to Professor Lupin. It was mainly about controlling the size of a corporeal Patronus and using it to communicate. After seeing Professor Lupin off that morning, they had come back to his office to fetch it and now were poring over it. Loren perched on the fifth step, chin rested on Hermione's left shoulder, awkwardly peering at the pages and occasionally sniffing the faint scent of her. As an advanced charm, the Patronus is more difficult to control than most, Hermione read. But difficult does not mean impossible. While you work on controlling magic, you must also learn to control your mind. A rustle. Hermione's fingers turned the page. The head on her shoulder shook and came up with a disgruntled snort. Hermione realized he hadn't finished the previous paragraph, and with a small sigh turned the page back. While he read, she asked, "Why not just make a copy with a duplicating charm, like Harry and Ron?" Loren glanced toward the forest. The two of them had only skimmed the notebook for 10 minutes before dashing off with Fang, circling Hagrid while he weeded the pumpkins like a pair of overexcited puppies. Loren snorted twice. That was his permission to keep reading. With his whole head rested on her chin now, he had to strain to lift it to speak, so he stayed silent unless necessary. Hermione reluctantly turned the page. What could have been read in 2 hours dragged on until sunset, but the good news was she read it thoroughly, almost memorized it. She had absorbed the theory and the practice methods, only constant training remained. She planned to practice over the summer. Hogwarts Library. Little wizards queued long and orderly at Madame Pince's desk, registering the books they wanted to borrow on parchment. Perhaps Professor McGonagall's hold on the school grew firmer. Even library books were being loaned for the holidays. Besides the usual Muggle-born students, many purebloods stood in line now too. Other students sat scattered among the stacks, idly thumbing through books they would not usually read, killing time while the queue shortened. Hermione sat by a window and looked up from her book at the line of students, and a curious, warm sense of achievement rose in her. She had recommended titles and encouraged others to take them. This was the first time she felt she had influenced so many people, as if she had nudged the world a little. Going home for the weekend. I want ice cream. I want Monica's tarts and apple pie, Loren murmured as he paused with his quill over the parchment. He stopped the quill and looked at Hermione. Anything else to add? We ought to write everything and send it home with Hanch. Then we won't need to take the cage on the train. Hermione glanced down at the words, ice cream, apple pie, tarts, on the parchment and whispered, "My parents are dentists. They hardly ever let me have sugary things, maybe a few times a year." "Then you're lucky. You can have sweets with me." Loren's tone was teasing. Hermione fell quiet a beat. She knew her mother baked those sweets for Loren, but she had never understood why her mother, who always lectured about dental hygiene, would indulge him. Anything else? A bright idea lit Hermione's face. She pursed her lips and said, "Cola, ask Mum to buy some cola." Loren dipped his quill again. "I'll write that you want cola." Hermione pressed his arm and stared at him sternly. "It's you who wants to drink it." "Hey!" Loren laughed. All right, I want to drink it." Hermione craned her neck to watch him add a few lines at the back of the letter, satisfied that she'd not been exposed, and then returned to pretending to read. Loren dipped the quill back in the inkwell and flicked the parchment. "Letter's done. Now for the writing fee and compensation for damage to my reputation." "What writing fee?" What damage? Hermione said, astonished. Loren adopted an air of wounded rectitude. There's a fee for writing a letter for someone. You asked for cola in my name. Doesn't that damage my reputation? Imagine Monica thinking I'm a bad boy who likes sweets and sugary drinks. Does that need imagination? Hermione laughed. What are you talking about? You're slandering me. Just stating facts. Oh, now you've hurt my feelings. I demand emotional distress compensation. Fine. On the second floor girls' lavatory, Myrtle was curled up in the cistern blowing bubbles. Hearing the familiar footsteps and the tap running, she drifted out of her stall and found Hermione cupping water to splash her face. Myrtle circled once and hovered, peering. Hermione, why is your face so red? Myrtle! Hermione squealed. Her face must have gone even redder. No, nothing. The sun was just too hot. I came to cool off. Sun, Myrtle leaned closer and scrutinized her. Myrtle thinks you're lying, but she can't find proof. Don't say that. Hermione calmed and tried a change of subject. I heard there's splashing in the girls' lavatory, driving people away again. Was that you, Myrtle? Oh, yes. Myrtle picked at an imaginary spot on her chin and sat on the basin. Ever since the Chamber of Secrets was found, people have pestered me with questions. This is the second time I've been the center of attention, and Myrtle is very happy. The first time was when they found my body. But people don't actually like me. They call me Fat Myrtle, Ugly Myrtle behind my back, poor, wretched, weepy Myrtle. Her voice wobbled on the verge of tears. Oh, an acne-faced Myrtle. Hermione's scalp prickled, and she hurried to soothe her. Don't cry, Myrtle. We wouldn't say that. We're your friends. Really? Myrtle sniffed and looked up. Hermione nodded reluctantly. That's wonderful. Myrtle whirled with joy and reached for Hermione's arm. Her ghostly hand passed through flesh and made her a little sad. Hermione, you should die. Hermione froze. Myrtle's eyes shone with ghoulish enthusiasm. Then I can take you to watch the boys shower. They shower very often when it gets hot. Oliver Wood's graduating soon. If you don't see him now, you won't have the chance later. Hermione vowed silently never to let Loren use the prefect's bathroom when he could help it. At least Cedric Diggory from Hufflepuff is still around. He's handsome. Myrtle muttered happily about possible shows. Hermione tried to be practical. Why not find another hobby, Myrtle? Something proper, like Sir Nicholas. He's popular at the feasts. Maybe you could do a play. The Basilisk story, perhaps? Really? Myrtle's face lit up. Hermione gave a cautious, encouraging nod. You could try. That's wonderful, Hermione. When you die, I'll make sure you see lots more boys showering. Myrtle cheered, flipped upside down, and plunged into the flushing toilet in a gurgle. Hermione breathed out, patted her cheeks, and left. Dealing with Myrtle, she decided, was more tiring than dealing with Loren. It was soon the last day of term. Exam results were in. Loren and his friends had passed everything, even Harry's potions exam. Hermione remained top of her year, and in good spirits, she tried not to dwell on Loren's small extortions. Percy had scored highly in his ultimate wizarding exam, and Fred and George finally had marks to show from their ordinary wizarding levels. Gryffindor's Quidditch success had pulled the House Cup their way for the third year running, and the end-of-term feast took place beneath banners of red and gold. The Gryffindor table was the liveliest. Students crowded around the Quidditch team and cheered until Professor McGonagall glowered a few times and quieted them. Neville, looking worried, glanced around the high table. I didn't see Professor Lupin. Is he sick again? Neville asked. Loren set down his knife and fork and sighed. Neville, he's resigned and left the school. Resigned? Neville was stunned. But I never even got to thank him. My parents heard Mr. Lupin was my defense against the dark arts teacher and asked me to send their regards. I didn't even know they knew each other. Don't worry, Hermione said gently. You'll see him again. Neville sat back on his stool in a daze and only slowly began to eat. Loren and the others had known the news for days and were already past the initial sadness. Harry returned to his place with a beef rib and a smug grin. I think Dumbledore intervened to stop Snape from deliberately failing me. Ron mumbled through a mouthful of roasted chicken, cheeks bulging. Harry stole a glance at the professors and happened to meet Snape's cold stare. He saw the tight twitch at the corner of Snape's thin mouth and watched Snape's fingers flex and flex on the table as if he wanted to rip someone's throat out. The sight made Harry all the happier. The disappointment about Lupin's absence faded a little. Snape noticed Harry's foolish smile and looked away with disdain. Grease and sauce flecked half his mouth. He ate in a manner no one would envy. Dumbledore sat beside Snape, watching the students with watery, fond eyes. Sincere, fervent emotions are as intoxicating as the scent of fresh bread, he said. I see such scenes year after year, and each time I am moved as if it were the first. My tears are almost uncontrollable. Do you feel it, Severus? No, Snape replied coldly. That's a pity. Sorry, perhaps we are all busy with the school's summer plans. Pomona must travel to Africa to check on supplies, Minerva has accounts to settle in negotiations, and Phileas and I are occupied as well. Snape sneered. Unlike you, our leisurely headmaster, and so we can't smell your bread. Dumbledore blinked, defending himself in a mildly wounded voice. But I must prepare for the International Confederation of Wizards and next year's Tri-Wizard Tournament, or perhaps it will be the Four-Wizard Tournament. Tri-Wizard Tournament? Someone murmured. Yes. Dumbledore stroked his beard, cut a slice of steak, and chewed slowly. They've decided to restart the Tri-Wizard Tournament, and Ilvermorny from the United States will take part, so it may well be a Four-Wizard Tournament. At a time like this, Snape frowned, it seems unwise to invite outsiders into Hogwarts again, especially Ilvermorny. No need to be so anxious, Dumbledore said, oddly non-committal. Lord Voldemort has not yet fully returned. Under the supervision of the 4 schools and the Ministry, he can be kept at bay. There was a hint in his voice that change might not be entirely unwelcome. He forked another piece of beef, chewed deliberately, and watched the hall, his blue eyes twinkling behind his half-moon spectacles, inscrutable as ever. It was as if, overnight, the younger students had packed and boarded the Hogwarts Express. On the platform by the Black Lake, Hagrid, gamekeeper in care of magical creatures professor, and Mr. Filch, the caretaker, were shepherding them aboard, occasionally scolding a few who were still running. You two with the red hair, get on the train. No chasing each other. Hagrid boomed. We've got it, Professor Hagrid. The Weasley twins called back in their usual peculiar tone, making the smaller children laugh. Hagrid's size was intimidating, but his gentleness was well known. Many second years had chosen his class, especially since his final exam that year had been rumored to be the easiest in a decade. As the laughter died away, Professor McGonagall watched Percy with a soft expression. Percy, have you really thought this through? She asked quietly. Your work during your internship was excellent. Several of us on the board were counting on you for more important duties. Thank you for your confidence, Professor, Percy said with a bright smile. Father's influence always had me curious about the Ministry. With the International Confederation in New York this year, I want to go and see how things work for myself. McGonagall sighed but managed an encouraging smile. You're right, Percy. You're young. Go see the world. Just come back when Hogwarts needs you. I will, Professor, Percy promised. Thank you for everything. Goodbye, Professor McGonagall said, and Percy waved as he joined the departing crowds. The old train's whistle blew, a cloud of white smoke puffed out, and the wheels clicked on the rails. The scarlet Hogwarts Express pulled slowly away from the station. Harry pressed his forehead to the cool glass and watched forests and hills blur past, feeling the strange ache of time slipping away. We won't see each other till after another summer, he said softly. We'll be 4th years when we come back. Feels like our first day was only yesterday. Ron, counting down to the Quidditch World Cup on his fingers, didn't answer. Loren leaned back with his eyes closed, trying to nap. Hermione cradled Crookshanks in her lap, parting the cat's thick fur to check his skin. Harry frowned. It was hard not to feel ignored in the cramped compartment. He cleared his throat and raised his voice a little. All right, if you're going to act like that, don't blame me. For the rest of the journey, until the train reaches school, I'm not talking to any of you. Hedwig on the luggage rack cocked her head and stepped aside a little. What's that outside the window? Hermione asked before the others could reply. A small gray blur bobbed up and down against the rushing air. It's a little owl, Ron said, scrambling up to peer through the glass. The tiny bird was so compact it could fit in a palm and was tumbling in the train's slipstream, clutching a letter. Loren, now awake, opened the window and reached out. The owl, buffered by the air, let him take it gently, hopped inside, dropped a letter onto Harry's seat, then flew in little circles about the compartment as if proud of its work. Hathaway, the owl clicked its beak, showing a peculiar sort of satisfaction. Crookshanks lifted his head and watched the bird with bright yellow eyes. "It's a letter from Sirius," Ron burst out, and Harry immediately tore open the envelope. "Dear Harry, I hope this letter reaches you before you see your aunt and uncle. I'm not sure how used they are to owl post. This bird was chosen in a hurry. I doubt its reliability. But it was the best available, and it was very eager to work. I already know Remus has resigned. He wrote to me before he left. He's as he always was, taking on responsibilities that aren't his. James and I used to joke that he only became a prefect because he liked meddling. Now I understand better. I'm sorry I still can't say where I am or what I'm doing. Don't worry about me. I live in a completely new place, and to be honest, I'm happier and busier than ever. I'll try to be back before the Quidditch World Cup final. Maybe I'll even bring a new friend to meet you. If I can't make it back, I might have to send you to Mr. and Mrs. Weasley for a while. I think Ron might be willing to take this owl as compensation for the trouble Wormtail caused, or as payment for keeping an eye on you for me. Please ask him. Also tell Loren and Hermione I send my thanks and apologies. If you need me, just write. Your owl will find me. I'll write again soon." Serious Harry read it once, then again, the warmth and a little ache rising in his chest. "Adopt it?" Ron said, eyes wide. "Did he really say that? After that damned Wormtail, I'd given up on pets." "He did say it," Harry said. "Don't worry, there aren't many animagi in the world. Our plan hasn't even worked yet, has it?" They'd spent the past months trying and failing at their animagus attempts, potions and weather conspiring against them. For now, their project lay uncompleted. Ron studied the small owl for a while and then looked to Loren for confirmation. Loren nodded. "Take it. It's an owl, even if it's small." "It's mine," Ron cheered, scooping the bird up with a grin as it pecked his fingers and made him laugh. For the rest of the ride, Harry reread Sirius's letter over and over. Ron entertained himself with the owl. Hermione set Crookshanks in a little wicker basket and opened Professor Lupin's notes, her brow furrowing as she reviewed the Patronus charm. Together, their study and their memories kept their attention occupied. Loren rested his head on Hermione's shoulder, pretending to read with her, but clearly losing patience. From his angle, he watched her profile as sunlight cut through the carriage windows and fell across her face. The changing light made her skin look even paler, and the delicate hairs at her temple shone like a halo. Loren's gaze lingered. She noticed and pushed at him a little, teasing. "If you can't sleep, get up and read," she said. "I can't get into it," he protested. "Then do your summer homework," she replied, nudging the backpack beside him. "You're terrible, Professor Granger. It's the first day of vacation, and you're already giving me homework." Hermione reached out, cupped his chin, and nudged him off her shoulder. I can sleep, Loren mumbled, his fingers slipping toward his backpack, and his head lolled to the side. "Really asleep?" Hermione asked, suspicious. She pinched his nose. He hummed and slumped farther. Then she poked his lips. "Kiss." Hermione smiled, half amused and half surprised that he could feign sleep so well. Loren's thoughts drifted away. In his head, he was back in the library of the fantastic book, Flamel, floating in the stacks, an unreadable play in hand, the aisles wide and empty. He pictured a made sofa, conjured with a handy spell, and the great, still library around him. He used the quiet to think through Lupin's notes on the Patronus. Lupin's notes, Loren remembered, split the charm into 3 parts: controlling the Patronus's light, producing a corporeal Patronus, and controlling its size, and more advanced uses. He'd already learned to call up the glow and shape its spread. The notes suggested you could also control the corporeal form's size, and even summon multiple Patronuses. It wasn't supposed to be deep magic, so much as a matter of approach and focus. If a wizard's corporeal Patronus was a tiny animal, could it fend off dozens of Dementors without changing size? Skilled wizards could enlarge their Patronus or radiate its light. They could even command multiple Patronuses. Loren pulled out his wand and, half casually, whispered, "Expecto Patronum." A bright silver light burst from the wand's tip. The soft radiance swelled until it was the strongest light in the imagined library. A low vibration filled the air as thousands of silver motes converged and resolved into a single enormous shape. A great killer whale of silver hovered in the air, its presence heavy and all-encompassing. The whale swayed its tail, and a towering wave of silvery light surged forward, crashing across the floor. The wave broke into sparkling droplets that vanished into the air like mist. Flamel, floating nearby, blinked at the spectacle. "Loren," he said, a little dazed, "the fantastic book has a place for practicing charms, you know." Loren scratched his head and grinned. "I thought the library needed more light, so I used a Patronus to brighten it up." Flamel floated closer, peering at the whale. "What were you planning to practice?" "Patronus applications," Loren said, sitting up. "Controlling size, summoning multiples, using them for communication." Back in the carriage, golden sunlight warmed the compartment. Hermione set her notes aside, listening to the regular breathing of the boy beside her. She reached up, pinched his nose again, then rubbed the tip of it between thumb and forefinger and smiled, content in the small domestic quiet of the train journey. The train kept heading south, and the light outside grew brighter. Noon was approaching, and the food cart's little wheels rattled down the corridor again as the plump witch pushed it along, selling iced pumpkin juice and pastries. Hermione pinched someone's cheeks, pulling them from side to side, and murmured in a half-suppressed voice, "Wake up, Loren. Wake up." Of course, that couldn't rouse him. Hermione pressed her lips together to hide the smile tugging at her mouth and went on pinching his cheeks, occasionally stroking his nose and nipping the tip of it, clearly enjoying herself. After more than 10 seconds, she saw his eyes flicker open. For a moment, a silvery film seemed to float across his dark pupils, like the tiny rippling tail of a whale. An effect so brief, she almost thought it was just a reflection of sunlight. Loren stared at her small hands on his cheeks and at her teasing, sideways smile. He looked annoyed, a cold glint flashing through his gaze like a sword's edge. "Cough! Cough!" Hermione cleared her throat, lowered her hands, smoothed her face, and said as casually as she could, "I was trying to wake you for lunch, Loren. The food cart's here." Loren, only half lost between sleep and wakefulness, squinted against the light, rubbed his tender cheeks, and looked at Hermione's flushed, innocent face. She shrank back a little under his stare. "Was that fun?" Hermione nodded, then quickly shook her head. "It was fun, wasn't it? I wanted to play too," Loren murmured faintly. "Next time you nap, keep one eye open." "I really was trying to wake you for lunch," Hermione protested with wide, innocent eyes. "Please believe me, Loren. Is that so?" Loren's voice was steady. "Of course," she said, earnest. Just as she thought she'd gotten away with it, he leaned close and spoke in a low, mischief-tinged voice. "How about I wake you up every night at 3 for a midnight snack?" Hermione froze, her breath caught. "I don't eat midnight snacks. Then I'll wake you only to sleep." "Wake up to sleep?" Hermione blinked, puzzled. "You mean get up and go back to bed?" She held her breath, watching his face carefully. After a moment, she realized he wasn't joking, and a small panic fluttered through her. This was exactly the sort of thing Loren might do. Would she never sleep peacefully this summer? She had to think fast. "I saw something in your eyes," Hermione blurted, imagination working faster than it did in exams. "It must have been sunlight and shadows, like your Patronus, Loren. Isn't that interesting?" She laughed nervously, then fell quiet as his cold gaze pinned her. Loren blinked slowly and kept looking. From that angle, he could see Hermione's fair cheeks, the loose brown hair at her temples that curled unruly when he'd slept, and the little wounded look that somehow made her more appealing. He wanted to look a second longer. Then, Hermione's hurried explanation made him smile inwardly. He had seen a Patronus in his own eyes. A clatter in the aisle broke the moment. The vendor pushed open the compartment door. "Anything for you, dears?" she called. The plump witch was all smiles, dimples, and cheer, though she looked a touch older than before. Harry and Ron were shaken out of their books by the racket and peered eagerly at the offerings. "A jug of iced pumpkin juice, please," Ron said. Loren stood, paid, and shot the guilty-looking Hermione a fierce glare. He took the pumpkin juice and then began producing food from his bag, steaming beef stew with potatoes, a freshly baked banana tart, still crisp bread, and stewed chickpeas. The vendor counted the coins and, watching him unpack, grew suddenly distracted. After slipping the nuts into her purse, she turned and pushed the cart away, her back seeming lonelier than before. When the small table was full, Loren produced knives and forks and handed them around. He himself ate with 2 small wooden sticks. Though it looked as if he was pulling everything from his backpack, Hermione, Harry, and Ron all knew he was using his storage scales, magical containers with insulating properties. Harry swallowed. I'm beginning to believe Professor Lupin will never go hungry. Ron nodded. The cart passed their compartment twice more, and each time the rattling grew louder. The vendor was hurrying on, unwilling to linger. After lunch, Loren set down his sticks and leaned back, satisfied. These plates and utensils are school property. Put them back in your storage scales, and remember to return them at the start of term. Okay. Harry and Ron were keen to tidy up after a free meal. A whirlwind sweep cleared the crumbs and bits. Everything was packed into Harry's scales, except Loren's wooden eating sticks. With Hermione watching mischievously, Loren, having slept all morning, couldn't doze again. He leaned against the window, watched the countryside, and chatted with his friends. Time slipped by in laughter and conversation. The train sped on across open fields. As dusk fell and the sun sank in the west, villages gave way to towns of red roofs and pale walls. The steam whistle screeched and the transmission thudded. The train eased into King's Cross. They emerged onto platform 9 3/4 into a surge of people. A warm, slightly sharp blend of smells hit them, and the noisy bustle of the station snapped the young wizards fully awake. They were back in the Muggle world. It always felt odd after a term at a magical castle. One morning, they had been surrounded by spells and potion smells. The next, they were hearing non-magical noises, mechanical clanks, and PA announcements. That disconnect rose every time they went home for the holidays. To punish Hermione for her earlier mischief, Loren handed both suitcases to her and walked out of the station carrying a wooden basket. Crookshanks was curled inside it with his front paws over his ears like a furry ball refusing to face reality. Hermione dragged the suitcases beside him with a resigned expression. People hurried past on the platform. Some waited for arrivals. Among the crowd, a strange red-haired couple stood out. The woman was short and plump in faded, unfashionable clothes, standing on tiptoe every now and then, as if expecting someone to step from the dividing wall between platforms. Her husband was tall and thin, a little bald, wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to another century. He stared at passers-by with an odd intensity. When someone scowled and muttered at him, the woman would swat him and scold him into silence. Then he would shift his gaze to the platform machines, the announcement speakers, the ticket dispensers, and fixate on them as if they were entirely new. They were awkwardly out of place. A hefty man with a flushed face, tiny eyes, and a thick beard had been watching them from nearby with a cautious suspicion. Then, an ordinary-looking white-haired man in a Muggle suit approached the red-haired couple, chatting amiably, and even showing the husband how to use the machines. Vernon Dursley, who had been observing from the shadows, felt relief wash over him. This man was plainly Muggle, suit, tie, hair gel, so the odd couple couldn't be wizards. They must be country relatives, Vernon reasoned. People from the countryside could be strange. He thought of last year's relative, the fuss and the story about a balloon and ministry men, and decided calmly he wouldn't be rash. He disliked wizards, but he wouldn't confront them. People from the countryside were like that. Just then, children began to emerge from the barrier between platforms. Vernon's gaze snapped to one boy in particular, black hair, green eyes, glasses, surrounded by a gang of red-headed children, dragging a suitcase and running forward. Red hair! Vernon's expression sharpened. Ah, my dears, a warm voice called. Long time no see, Harry, you've lost weight. And you too, Loren, Hermione. Mrs. Weasley bustled forward, hugging and greeting each of the young wizards. You're a bit later than I expected. If you'd been any later, we might have gone to someone else's house. The children followed her gaze. Arthur Weasley, laughing and talking to the white-haired Muggle, seemed at ease and very normal. Loren and Hermione walked over slowly. Grandpa Bates, what are you doing here? They asked in surprise. Bates glanced up, saw them. Hermione with 2 suitcases and Loren with just a wooden basket, and flicked his forehead at him. What am I doing here? I came to pick you 2 up. You brat! Bates wrapped him again, then took the suitcases from Hermione. He hefted them. They were light. He looked stern for a moment. 2 empty suitcases still earned a scolding. Hermione stood beside him, outwardly calm, but Loren could see a glint of secret satisfaction in her eyes. He made a mental note to settle things with her later. He rubbed his forehead, trying to ease the sting, and asked, "How come you were chatting to Mr. Weasley?" 2 years ago, I was drinking with Hagrid at the Leaky Cauldron, Bates said, "and I saw the Weasleys when you came back. When I was waiting at the station this time, I saw them again, so I went to say hello. A scout's instinct. Learn it, kid." "You're a logistics transport soldier, aren't you?" Loren ventured, and Bates flicked his forehead again. Mrs. Weasley returned with the rest of her brood. After introductions, Fred and George took a shine to Bates and kept him laughing. When evening fell and it was time to go, Mrs. Weasley urged goodbyes. Ron called out, "Wait for news. I'll call about the World Cup." "It's better to write," Harry told him, glancing at Vernon. "A phone call might upset the Dursleys." Mr. Weasley laughed. "I'll write the Muggle way. Bates showed me. Just chuck on a stamp and drop it in the box. It's simple." "Hurry up, Arthur. We still have to go home and make dinner." Mrs. Weasley prodded, and the red-haired family trailed off laughing. Harry said his goodbyes and pushed his case toward Uncle Vernon, who stood not far off. Their parting was not the explosive scene Harry had feared. After a brief greeting, Vernon opened the trunk, put in the luggage, Harry climbed into the back seat, and the car drew away toward Privet Drive. Bates ruffled the 2 children's hair and called cheerfully, "Come on! We're going home too." 3:90. Hermione fell off her horse. It was already dark when they got home. In June, the Hampstead Garden suburb of London was lush with trees and nameless flowers in bloom. Loren noticed some ornamental fruit trees already bearing small, dirty-skinned fruits. Everything looked exactly as they had left it. After dropping Loren and Hermione at the front door, Grandpa Bates drove straight into the Grangers' garage. He handled the car with the practiced skill of someone who had parked there often over the past 6 months. They must have heard him. Before Loren and Hermione reached the door, it swung open from inside. Monica appeared, smiling, and knelt down to pull them both into a hug, pressing her forehead to theirs. "My dears." "Mommy." Hermione melted instantly out of her top student, know-it-all pose and snuggled against her mother. Loren let Monica rub his forehead too. Wendell came out from the inner room, calling, "Come in quickly. The pie's getting cold." Monica gave him a reproving look, released the children, and told them to go wash their hands for dinner while she and Wendell set the table. At the sink, Hermione scrubbed her hands carefully once, and then squeezed soap for a second wash. Loren rinsed his hands casually, then wiped them on Hermione's clothes with the air of someone who didn't think he'd done anything wrong. "No prize guessing game. Is there any of your dad's fish on the table?" he teased. Hermione ignored the jab. She grabbed his hands, now covered in soap, and scrubbed them hard, reminding him in an affectedly stern voice, "The train station is dirty. Your hands could have bacteria. They must be cleaned properly." Hermione's hands were soft, and with the foam they were slippery. It felt oddly pleasant, but she scrubbed so hard it hurt. By the time the foam rinsed away, Loren's hands were bright pink. He held them up, a grimace on his face. "I just wiped my hands on you. Is that really necessary?" "I was helping you wash," Hermione sniffed. Even while drying her hands, she caught his and rubbed them again, nearly rubbing the skin raw. When they returned to the dining room, Grandpa Bates had already parked the car and come in. 2 empty suitcases leaned against the wall. Dinner was laid out, a warm, simple feast. Apple pie sent a sweet scent through the room. Braised red cabbage added color. There was hearty potato stew and salad, Windsor lamb and herb pie, strawberry puff pastry stacked up, flaky crusts gleaming, and juicy pan-fried steak. No expensive dishes and nothing elaborate, but everything felt homely and inviting. "Loren, everything you wrote wanting is here," Monica said with a smile. "The egg tarts are still in the oven. We'll save the ice cream for after dinner." She took a can of cola from the fridge. "Caramel and carbonation are bad for your teeth, but since it's your holiday, I'll make an exception." The hiss of the pull tab and the spray of fizz was oddly satisfying. Monica set a can of cola by Loren's plate. Hermione's eyes followed the can, then went up to her mother with an expression that said everything. Do you want some cola too, Hermione? Monica asked, amusement plain in her voice. She already knew the answer. Loren's face lit up with a schadenfreude smile. Wendell glanced over, curious, while Scout Bates concentrated on his salad. Hermione put the pieces together quickly. Grandpa Bates wasn't a dentist, so he wouldn't be policing what drinks Loren had. Therefore, Loren wouldn't have needed to ask for it in a letter. Monica, sharp as she was, would see who actually wanted the cola. That person was Hermione Granger. If Monica and Wendell thought Hermione had been sneaky and dishonest about drinking fizzy drinks, they'd be cross. When their eyes met, Hermione gave a miserable nod. Yes. Monica casually added a second can for Hermione, as if nothing was wrong, and called Wendell to bring out the steamed halibut. They sat to eat. Hermione turned her petulance into appetite, devouring the strawberry puff pastry and gulping cola. Whenever Loren's amused gaze met hers, she glared back. She didn't know how well observed she was. Wendell smiled and subtly exchanged looks with his wife, and Monica refused to acknowledge them. Wendell cut a piece of halibut and took a bite, looking content. This child was livelier than before. Letting her play more with Loren had been a good idea. When Hermione had been little, she had been so sensible it made one ache. Her parents had only ever briefly warned about sugary drinks, and Hermione had avoided them, so disciplined that she had never known the particular joy of sticky sweetness. Seeing other children crying and then delighting in sweets at dental visits made Monica and Wendell realize something had been missing. They hadn't wanted to encourage bad dental habits. After all, two dentists couldn't teach their own daughter how to ruin her teeth, but maybe a little harmless indulgence wasn't the worst thing. Loren was helping them make up that lost experience. Wendell, ever the enthusiast, praised the halibut between mouthfuls, talking about protein and vitamins until his technical talk turned into an obvious hint. He looked at Loren expectantly, the same look Hermione had given. Monica rolled her eyes. Bates silently ate his salad. Hermione paused, watching her father and then Loren, torn. Loren put down his cutlery and after a beat asked, "Where did that halibut come from?" Wendell brightened, proud as if he'd swallowed cold water in a desert. "I caught it at sea. The wind was strong that day. A few of us from the club went fishing. I was the first to catch one." "Club?" Hermione echoed, frowning at her mother. Monica nodded. "After you returned to Hogwarts at Christmas, he joined a fishing club." Wendell pointed at the halibut steaming on the plate. "This is the one. I heard you were coming home today, so I went out to sea specifically to catch fresh fish for you." Monica looked at him and said flatly, "The money you spent chartering a boat, buying bait, and new gear could have bought dozens of fresh halibuts." Wendell looked away and resumed his litany about halibut being rich in docosahexaenoic acid and unsaturated fatty acids and how they were good for brain development and lowering cholesterol. The table buzzed with conversation. After dinner, Monica, with Loren and Hermione helping, had the kitchen cleared in no time. The five of them flopped on the sofa, Monica brewing tea and helping the adults enjoy the fresh egg tarts, while Loren and Hermione shared a cup of ice cream with plastic spoons. A Sherlock Holmes mystery was on TV, and Bates watched most intently. Wendell ate an egg tart with a thoughtful tea sip between bites. Could eggs be used for bait? After the kids finished their ice cream, Monica collected the dishes and told them to gargle and wash up. When Loren and Hermione came out of the bathroom, the TV episode had just ended. Bates sipped his tea and asked, "Loren, Hermione, you'll be fourth years next school year, right?" Loren blinked, confused by the direction of the question. "Hogwarts is a 7-year school. Then we graduate and start our lives." Bates spoke slowly, thinking aloud. "Excellent graduates like you could go to Gringotts or join the Ministry of Magic. Hermione used to say she wanted to work at the Ministry, didn't she?" Hermione nodded, distant. She wasn't sure why he was bringing this up. Bates continued, "I heard Mr. Weasley say that wizards from ordinary backgrounds sometimes face subtle discrimination from pure-blood families." He let the words hang. "Discrimination worse than we imagined." Wendell and Monica exchanged worried looks. "Don't worry," Loren said, trying to reassure them. "The magical world is changing. By the time we graduate, the situation may be better, and we can do perfectly well outside the magical world if we need to." They ran through their savings and investments. the ones Loren had helped set up, and relaxed. Hermione seized the moment. This holiday, we're planning to go to the United States. The International Confederation of Wizards is holding a conference. It's a good chance to learn more about the political landscape of the magical world. The International Confederation of Wizards? What's that? Wendell asked. Like a United Nations for wizards? Ministries of magic attend? Britain, France, India, Loren listed. Bates's curiosity was piqued. Loren nibbled on an egg tart, relieved. In his head, he hadn't finished the plan. Once the Wizarding War ended, the old ministry would be purged and the magical world rebuilt, an opening for Hermione to show what she could do. As the night deepened, Loren and Bates said their goodbyes. They took a plate of egg tarts and one of pies for the neighbors. After Hermione bathed and changed into pajamas, she clung to Monica, insisting on a mother-daughter chat before bed. "Mom, when did you figure out about the cola?" Hermione asked, lying with her head on Monica's arm, eyes flickering with guilt. "You little trickster," Monica smiled, pinching her nose. "Loren's refrigerator always has cola. Why would he write specifically for it?" Hermione tugged away, grumbling. "So he planned this when he wrote the letter and tricked me. Nasty Loren." "What about you?" Monica pinched her again. "Forcing someone to write a letter, aren't you nasty?" Hermione protested. "He charged me a writing fee and even a mental distress fee." Monica laughed. "What are those?" Hermione turned shyly away. Monica's smile widened. She rolled Hermione back and demanded to know what a writing fee and a mental distress fee were. Hermione covered her face, whimpering and refusing to answer, until Monica tickled her sides in mock interrogation. Loren put the egg tarts and pies in the fridge for breakfast and then followed Grandpa Bates into the bedroom. The beds and duvets had been made before he arrived. Bates opened the wardrobe and told him about the new clothes he'd bought over the past 6 months, reminding him to wear them. There had been times before when Loren forgot new clothes in the wardrobe, and they'd gone unworn. Before leaving, Bates warned him earnestly, "Loren, if Hermione wants to do something, help her. Be smart. Don't be a fool." "You could have just said that without the personal attack," Loren muttered. "She's Hermione. Of course I'll help her." "When we left the station today, I saw you carrying both suitcases for little Hermione," Bates teased. "They were empty," Loren protested. "Not heavy at all." "That's still not allowed." Bates tapped his head. After Bates left, Loren showered and changed into fresh pajamas. The crescent moon hung among the treetops outside his window. He watched it for a while, then decided to continue practicing the Patronus charm from earlier. He took out his fantastic book, hesitated between the dual room and library icons, and chose the library. A silver light flashed, and his consciousness appeared in the bright, silent stacks. Just as he was gathering himself, he heard an unexpected voice behind a bookshelf. "Mr. Flamel, why can't my Patronus shrink?" Hermione asked crisply. Flamel answered in a gentle voice Loren had never heard before. "It takes a little trick. As your notes say, while managing your magical output, you must also control your mind and memories." Loren slowed, quiet and curious, and crept closer. 391. The Little Witch Who Gets into the Eyes of Books. Expecto Patronum. The young witch's incantation rang through the empty library, passing between rows of shelving. Loren crouched behind a stack of books, watching Hermione coax the Patronus into coherence. The library's electric lights dimmed, and a soft, silvery white glow gathered around the dolphin-shaped Patronus, becoming the only light in the vast room. As Hermione waved her wand, the glow condensed into a ball the size of a half-meter. She concentrated, trying to keep the light steady, but the evenness broke apart and the ball scattered into flecks. "Keep a steady stream of magic. Balance it," Flamel said gently. Hermione nodded with a serious expression, breathed deeply, and raised her wand again. Her face looked tense, as if she were with a professor. Flamel smiled softly. "Don't be nervous, relax." "You were never this gentle when you taught me, Flamel," Loren muttered as he stepped out from behind the bookshelf. "Loren?" Hermione's eyes widened at his sudden appearance, and she looked from Loren to Flamel in bewilderment. It took her a moment to process it. Loren glanced at her. She was clearly flustered. It seemed she hadn't realized the library was connected to him, and he too had questions. "So what exactly is going on here?" Loren asked. He paused, remembering something. This morning on the train, Hermione said she saw the light and shadow of a Patronus in my eyes. Is that related? Hermione's memory of mentioning an orca-shaped light in his eyes clicked into place. He'd been practicing his Patronus from the fantastic book. The coincidence was too much. Hermione was stunned, then slowly realized. Loren knew Flamel and this odd library, and the library itself was connected to Loren. I suspect there's a connection, Flamel said, leaning forward slightly as if floating in the air. When you practice certain advanced charms, the fantastic book's link with you can leave traces in the physical world. Miss Granger's consciousness established a connection with the book just now, and because your mind wasn't guarding against Miss Granger, this visit occurred. Loren nodded and recounted the details. I remember. Hermione, still a little dazed, added, Last time at school, I entered the library once. I saw strange flames in your eyes. I thought it was Hogwarts' dream library and that Mr. Flamel was its ghostly librarian, she said, eyeing the two of them with suspicion. So what exactly is this place? It's a long story, Loren began. For more than 10 minutes, he explained the origins of the fantastic book and Nicholas Flamel, describing the other rooms, the alchemy boiler room, the potion laboratory, the dueling practice room, and the many uses of the book. Mr. Nicholas Flamel, the Philosopher's Stone, practicing magic. No wonder, Hermione murmured. Pieces fit together, the oddities around Loren, the library she'd glimpsed. Information flooded her mind until it felt like it might overflow. After the tours, they returned to the bright library. Hermione's small face was taut with excitement and curiosity. She had first thought Flamel was simply the librarian or even a ghostly professor. He had seemed gentle and made her cautious, so she'd chosen to practice the Patronus here. Now, realizing all of this belonged to Loren, her long-suppressed excitement surfaced. The shelves were crammed, 6 centuries worth of books collected by Nicholas Flamel, plus a complete set from the British Library. Each thick volume radiated an irresistible pull. She could read anything she wanted, with no need for sleep or the worry of tired eyes. It was the paradise she'd always dreamed of. Hermione blinked back into the present and looked at Loren, eyes shining. So this library is real. All the books are real, and there's no restricted section? Yes, no restricted section. Flamel nodded as if pleased. Read as long as you like. Read whatever you like. No need to worry about getting tired or nearsighted either. That's right. Loren watched Hermione and Flamel and felt something tug at him, an unease he couldn't name. The silvery Patronus glow had faded, and the dome lights returned to their full brightness. The silent space felt charged, like a held breath. Hermione's lips pressed together, her eyes dancing. That night, she seemed to have discovered something even more magical than Hogwarts. Under Professor Lupin's notes and repeated practice, the Orca Patronus gradually shrank until it was about the size of a normal stag or lion. Not a whale-sized apparition anymore, but a medium-sized, solid figure. The library remained lit, punctuated by the occasional turning of a page. Loren put his wand away. He decided to postpone learning Patronus message techniques for another day. Flamel had already left. Hermione sat cross-legged in the open space behind 2 rows of shelves. She'd probably grown tired of the dense Transfiguration tomes and was now reading a large volume on the medieval history of magic, annotated by Nicholas Flamel himself. Because Flamel had lived through much of that era, his notes lent the histories of vivid authenticity. Hermione reread passages and poring over his annotations, looking up related books whenever Flamel mentioned other events. Before long, she'd built a wall of open books around herself. Loren joked that it wouldn't be long before she barricaded herself in a cocoon of volumes. Hermione, Loren called, but she didn't respond. He leaned close to her ear and raised his voice slightly. Hermione? She jumped, eyes bright with surprise. How long have you been reading? Stand up and move around. Loren placed his hand on her forehead and gently shook her, trying to snap her out of her book bubble. Are you planning to stay cooped up in here reading all the time? The books here are so interesting. So? Mr. Flamel said that our consciousnesses are here, so we don't need to move or sleep, she replied slowly. But reading too much still makes your head spin. Loren pinched her cheek. Have you noticed you're slow to react already? Am I? Hermione pushed aside thoughts of witch life during goblin rebellions. my discourse with Gamp on transfiguration laws, and a few experiences from the witch hunts, and tried to come back to the present. Her eyes kept drifting to the book on her lap. She wanted to know what Flamel had written next and what the social scene had been like back then. She's not fully with us yet, Loren sighed, and rubbed at Hermione's face a little too vigorously, making her yelp. Are you sober now? I'm sober. Hermione pushed his hand away and rubbed her face, muffling a complaint. You don't need to use so much force. Loren hauled her to her feet. The books here are Mr. Nicholas Flamel's 600-year accumulation. Even if you skip half the alchemy texts, the rest will take you a lifetime if you never stop reading. Hermione, Miss Granger, Professor Granger, he said, using 3 titles for emphasis. You are not finishing them all. Hermione made a woeful little sound. Now go to sleep. Tomorrow morning, wake up and practice your Patronus. Loren's tone became firm. Sleep. Hermione's eyes widened in disbelief. Mr. Flamel said when our consciousness is here, our bodies outside are sleeping. Why should we sleep here? Loren was quiet for a moment, looking at the young witch with a complicated expression. So you plan to read all night, practice charms when you get tired, and then go back to reading? No. Hermione, lacking confidence, replied softly. If I get tired, I'll switch to another book, and practice charms during the daytime. Loren had to laugh. If he let her read through the night, tomorrow she might not be able to tell a wand from a toothbrush. He pushed her gently, and she felt the room tilt. The next thing she knew, she was lying under a blanket. Her lashes fluttered, and then she was awake in her bed, the familiar room around her, and the soft mattress beneath her. She blinked, annoyed. Had Loren kicked her out? She'd only wanted to read more. Rolling over, she buried her face in the pillow and let her drowsy thoughts wander. She promised herself she'd find a shelf to hide behind tomorrow and read as much as she pleased. Oh, last time she'd only stayed for one night when she entered the library. Would she have to go into his eyes again? She'd have to pry them open before he woke up. Morning came. Loren woke with sore eyes but kept them closed at first. When his pupils focused, he saw Hermione's impish face leaning over him, her 2 small hands pressing the skin at his temples, thumb and forefinger prying his eyelids open so he could barely blink. Tears threatened. Hey! Loren yanked her hands away and rubbed his sore eyes. Hermione, what are you doing? Attempted murder? She was still in pale blue pajamas. Loren suspected she'd planned the early morning ambush and come straight over without washing. Hermione released her grip, her expression falling. No flames, no Patronus. I couldn't read last night. You wanted to read. He pinched her cheek until she squealed, then let go, more annoyed than angry. Still want to read? Yes, Hermione answered, lips flushed but defiant. Loren sat up and glanced at the dawn outside. It was probably still early. The Grangers hadn't left for work yet. When did you wake up? Just now. Have you eaten breakfast? Not yet. Brushed your teeth and washed your face? No. Her voice grew quieter as the questions went on and her head dipped. Realizing she'd been acting childishly, she seemed to shrink a little. Loren swung his legs out of bed, shuffled into slippers, and led her to the bathroom. The cabinet held plenty of spare toiletries. He unwrapped a new toothbrush, squeezed on a glob of toothpaste, and put it into her mouth. Orange-flavored toothpaste. He liked the scent so much, even his wardrobe had orange-scented sachets. In the mirror, both of them looked disheveled. Hair mussed, sleepy faces. Loren rinsed, handed Hermione a cup of water, and began brushing his own teeth. Do you feel a bit dizzy in the morning when you wake up? He asked through a mouthful of foam. Hermione shot a glance at him and started brushing too. Foam filled her mouth, and she answered muffled, a little. Loren spat, then took the cup and swilled cold water before handing it back. I discovered this a while ago. When our consciousnesses enter the fantastic book, the body outside doesn't feel anything, but our minds still get tired. If your body's energy is high enough to keep you from sleeping, that fatigue can feel worse. Hermione finished her brushing thoroughly. She'd been raised by dentist parents, and finally spoke. It's not that I don't want you to let me read. He turned the tap to clean his toothbrush, then said, let's make a deal. While we're in the fantastic book, we divide our time, reading, activity, and rest, equally. Agreed? Hermione nodded. She rinsed her mouth, took a sip, and then froze, her cheeks flushing. Loren had left a bit of toothpaste foam on the rim of the cup when he handed it to her. 392. A New Year's Letter to Book Friends. January 22. I'm wishing everyone an early Happy New Year. The book started on March 5th, and it's almost been a year. I've already written 1.4 million words, which far exceeded my initial expectations, but looking at the story's timeline, we're not even halfway through. I've written a lot of filler, and I feel deeply apologetic to all my readers. Please accept my sincere apologies. To be frank, because my outline was incomplete, I had too many ideas, and my writing ability was limited. The book often lacks rhythm. Trivial digressions and redundant sections have taken up too much space. Fortunately, you've shown your support anyway, believing that despite its flaws there are enjoyable parts, and you've accompanied me this far. I offer my heartfelt thanks. When I first typed the opening line, I was in a difficult low point and began the book partly as an escape from reality. Writing it has helped me more than I can say, and I'm deeply grateful for that as well. Going forward, I'll try to pick up the pace and speed the plot along, though I've been promising that since before the 1 million word mark, and it still hasn't really improved. Haha. Tomorrow, I'll be on holiday and heading home. I'll do my best to update diligently and not let you down. Wishing all fellow readers a new year of peace, health, joy, smooth sailing, sudden wealth, and finding love. Peculiar Fennelbean 2024.02-1. 393. The First Message of the Patronus. It was breakfast time at the Granger house. Wendell climbed the stairs with a plate of freshly baked tarts, pausing at his daughter's bedroom door. Thinking a tart had cooled, he took a bite, only to burn his mouth on the hot filling. He huffed and puffed to cool it, swallowed slowly, smacked his lips, then knocked. Hermione, time to get up for breakfast. I know it's your first day of the holidays, but you can't sleep in all morning. Before he could finish his gentle scolding, the door clicked open. Hermione stood there neatly dressed. Her hair was a little mussed, and a faint blush sat on her cheeks, but she looked wide awake. Wendell blinked. Oh, already up. Go brush your teeth and come down. Your mother used the leftover pastry dough to make these tarts. I've already brushed my teeth, Hermione said, sounding a little shy. Already brushed? You're really an early riser, Wendell muttered, then turned and went downstairs, taking another cautious bite of pastry. Hermione followed. Mrs. Granger, a doctor, had prepared a well-rounded breakfast. Milk, fried eggs, bacon, tarts, whole wheat bread, and fruit and vegetables. The food masked the lingering toothpaste taste in Hermione's mouth and slowly brought her out of her fugue. Loren had been right. It had to have been lack of sleep. How else could she have acted so foolish last night? Monica popped a final piece of toast into her mouth, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and spoke up. Hermione, the clinic's busy period won't end for a few more days. Once we get through this, we'll take you out. Can Loren stay over with you for a few days? Okay, Mum. Hermione nodded, finishing the rest of her milk. Wendell, finishing his tart, suddenly remembered something. We bought a new fruit-flavored toothpaste. Want some, Hermione? Orange, okay? Cough, cough. Hermione choked on her milk, nearly spitting, and coughed twice. No, that's fine, Dad. This child, why is she acting so odd? Wendell and Monica exchanged suspicious looks. Next door, the neighbors had just finished breakfast. Loren waved his wand idly, and the grease and crumbs loosened from plates, cutlery, and cups, floated into the sink, and drifted into the trash. Once the worst of the grime came off, the dishes lined up, clinked as they jumped into the sink, scrubbed against one another, then bounced out to arrange themselves neatly back in the cupboard. The whole kitchen was sorted in less than a minute. Bates watched from the doorway and sighed. Housework done with magic isn't the same. These dishes don't carry the love of a family meal. Loren put away his wand, half amused. A dishwasher can hold your love if you're willing to wait an hour, or you can wash by hand. Bates muttered and shut up. After moving to the town, he'd grown lazy about the kitchen. When Loren wasn't around, he scarcely used it. Wendell's fishing trips didn't help. He always dragged Bates along, so Monica ended up looking after him. After breakfast and a short rest, Bates coaxed Loren into the backyard to weed, prune, water, and fertilize. Where the yard had once been bare, a lush lawn spread out now, flowers bloomed, and tree branches arched into a green canopy. What began as a hobby turned into a pastime that grew better and more ambitious with time. Bates's garden now rivaled the Grangers next door. June had settled in, warm sun filtered through the leaves, and it was tempting to lie back and doze. By the time they finished, half the day was gone. Just as they were about to prepare lunch, there was a knock. Hermione stood on the doorstep, eyes bright and rimmed with sleep, hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She'd changed out of her pajamas into a white short-sleeved t-shirt and denim shorts that brushed her knees. She carried some leftover ingredients Monica had given her last night and sounded awkward as she spoke. "Mom and Dad aren't back for lunch. I thought I'd bring these over and then come and have lunch with us," Bates said, taking the basket and ushering her in. As Hermione passed Loren, she shot him a triumphant look and pinched her nose in mock victory. Loren turned his head and the corner of his mouth twitched. Loren made lunch while Hermione offered to wash the dishes afterward. She waved her wand, and the plates were rinsed, dried, and put away in perfect order. Then the two of them began debating, half serious, which combination of spells washed fastest and cleanest. Bates moved a lounge chair into a sunny patch in the backyard, lay back, and listened to their murmured conversation until he fell into a doze. These young wizards, he thought, always an experiment. Ottery St. Catchpole was a small, quiet village where even during the worst economic times, no one went hungry. It was hardly ordinary, though. The old folk brimmed with magical tales. Every summer and Christmas, city-dwelling families brought their children home to hear them. People swore they'd seen flying cars. There was a secluded large house nearby that sometimes seemed to hide itself, and muffled explosions could be heard from within. Strange little creatures appeared in the fields, and children swore they were called gnomes. A crooked 4-story house on the edge of the village, the burrow, thumped with the sound of a ghoul in the attic. "George, Fred, tell that thing to be quiet." Mrs. Weasley's loud voice echoed through the rooms. Molly was in a foul mood. Her third son had left for work and was rarely home, and she took out her irritation on dinner potatoes, chopping them into tiny, resentful cubes. Heavy footsteps clattered up to the attic, and 2 minutes later the ghoul quieted. Ron stood in the courtyard, squinting at a 4th-floor window, and then returned to feeding his owl. "Ginny, I bet they've tied the ghoul to the pipes again," he said. Ginny, across the table, purred at the idea. "I don't want your chocolate frog card. Let me borrow Pigwidgeon." The little owl chirped happily and hopped across the table. "It's your fault. It only knows that name now," Ron protested, putting an arm possessively around the fluffy bird. "Who do you want to write to? Pigwidgeon's still small. He can't deliver heavy things." "It's just a letter," Ginny said. "Besides, I want your Agrippa card." "Deal," Ron grinned. "Mom scolded them for tying the ghoul to the pipes. Now they hang it upside down." "How do you know that?" Ron asked, suspicious. Ginny's face fell a little. "Someone has to untie it. It looked too sad." Up on the 3rd floor in the twins' room, George and Fred bent over a parchment list, whispering and plotting. "A set of fake wands. 1 galleon," one suggested. "Too pricey. They're our exclusive product. All right, 1 galleon for now. Next, Tong toffees." A week of holidays slid by. One lazy afternoon, under the plane tree in the Granger yard, dappled sunlight made shifting spots on the grass. Crookshanks was getting a bath in a tub of sun-warmed water. The long-haired cat hated water, so his wailing was loud and lobster-like, but eventually the heat and the soap softened his protests, and he resigned himself to the ordeal, looking even more bedraggled with his fur clinging in damp tangles. Loren lay on his back, watching clouds drift through gaps in the leaves. He tracked one cloud with his eyes and imagined it moving from one gap to the next. "If I close my eyes and count to 100, that cloud will be in the next opening," he told himself. He closed his eyes, counted, opened them, and the cloud was nowhere. Both the original and the imagined cloud had vanished. Hermione's clear voice broke into his thoughts. "Loren, remember that book we used last night about using the Patronus to send messages? Want to try it now?" "No, I'm busy," Loren said. Hermione tilted her head with an amused look. "Busy with Sir Nicholas's head?" she teased. Loren gave a lazy smile, but didn't resist. Hermione tugged him to a sitting position against the plane tree trunk, squatted in front of him, cupped his cheeks between her hands, and explained. I'll sit behind the tree. We'll send messages with our Patronuses. Clear? Clear, Loren answered, bemused. Hermione flicked her wand. Expecto Patronum. A soft, silvery light coalesced into the shape of a small dolphin, about the length of her forearm. It twitched its tail and made shimmering ripples in the air. Hermione leaned close and whispered, "How's the weather today?" She sent the dolphin off with a light flick. After half a minute, a wobbling, arm-sized silver orca appeared instead. It bobbed and produced a crisp, annoyed voice. "Are you stupid? Can't you see for yourself?" Hermione took a steadying breath, forced herself to ignore the tone, waved the orca away, and conjured the dolphin again. "How about tomorrow?" she asked. The orca returned a moment later, carrying someone else's sharp voice. "Are you stupid? How would I know about tomorrow?" And then the Patronus conversation, which should have been neat and practical, went off the rails. Snappy replies and petty insults ping-ponged between the silvery animals. "You're the stupid one." "No, you're stupid." Darn it, you're damnable." "Nasty. You're nasty." Silvery light flashed and shimmered, the animals bobbing like ill-tempered toys, while Hermione and Loren tried not to laugh at how quickly their experiment had become a juvenile squabble in spectral form. They kept at it anyway, attempting to steer their little messengers back to useful messages, but the Patronuses seemed to have opinions of their own. 394. Slander. Pure slander. BBC News. Recently, the Greenwich Observatory recorded speed fluctuations in fragments of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, attracting attention from astronomy enthusiasts worldwide. The comet was jointly discovered by American astronomers Eugene Shoemaker and Carolyn Shoemaker, and by amateur astronomer David Levy. Originally, it broke away from the outer reaches of the solar system and became a periodic comet. Calculations show it split into 21 fragments about 40,000 kilometers from Jupiter's surface due to strong tidal forces. The square-headed TV in the supermarket was replaying yesterday's bulletin, though no one paid it any mind. Customers were busy picking up discounted goods and daily necessities they could get with coupons. The store's security was tight. No one was sneaking milk from the shelves or attempting to walk out unpaid. The Granger couple and Grandpa Bates were choosing provisions for the long trip. Loren and Hermione wandered nearby, occasionally dropping a box of snacks into the adult's cart. Wendell was holding a plastic-wrapped metal object, reading the label carefully. "Hornet Sting Spinning Reel. All-metal fishing reel," he murmured. "Perfect for sea fishing." Wendell's eyes narrowed. This was it. With this, he'd catch a monster. He stole a glance at Monica, and as if it were nothing, put the reel in the cart. The plastic packaging bumped other items and gave a soft click. Monica tore her eyes from the shelf, looked down at the reel, and shot him a glare. "Is that something we should be taking on a long trip, Wendell?" "I think it is." Wendell's voice was low. "Anyway, with a magic pocket, it's not a hassle to bring extra things, right? Then Loren could just conjure you fishing gear with magic. Why buy it?" "It's different." "What's different?" "It's just different." Wendell finished and watched her face, trying to guess what she was thinking. Monica's expression stayed flat. She was too bored to argue. Bates moved along beside them, picking up a bottle of sunscreen and tossing it in. He'd browned a bit after their last trip to Egypt. The sea sun might be worse, so he wanted to be prepared. Loren and Hermione drifted down the aisle with a sample cup of ice cream. Loren squeezed a bagged chip now and then. Every time the chips crinkled, he scooped another spoonful with a delighted grin. Hermione kept an eye out, like she expected a security guard to leap out and throw Loren out of the store at any moment. Seeing her expression, Loren asked solemnly, "Do you think I'm indulging my bad habits?" "Aren't you?" Hermione said in surprise. "Of course not," Loren protested. "Cold facts. The items placed in the most convenient spots are usually closest to their expiry dates. I'm not feeding a bad habit, I'm warning consumers." Hermione raised an eyebrow, grabbed a bag of chips, and checked the production date. He was right. Loren sighed theatrically. "Alas, there aren't many kind people like me left." She put the chips back. "I still think you're doing it to satisfy your bad habits." "Sk, you don't understand me." "That's precisely why I say I understand you." "Sk, slander." After finishing his ice cream and tossing the cup into the bin, Loren coaxed Hermione into trying 2 sample jelly sachets, and on the pretense that she disliked strawberry, finished hers as well. After both, he looked for more samples. Once we get to the International Confederation of Wizards and come back from the States, it'll be just about time for the Quidditch World Cup final. What a holiday. You're not into Quidditch. I'm into the frenzy. Watching fans brawl, players curse, and all the other races show up. What a spectacle. How do you know that will happen? Isn't that what the World Cup is? Loren's eyes sparkled. What a fulfilling holiday. Hermione looked at him coolly. By the way, when we travel to the United States, I'll bring all your homework. We won't be bored on the ship. You're strange, Loren frowned. It's one thing for you to bring your own homework, but why mine too? If I don't make you do homework with me, when we get back you'll blame lack of time and copy mine. I don't want to be tricked. Loren gasped and covered his eyes. You're using legilimency on me. When did you learn that? Hermione put his hand down. It's not legilimency. It's just my understanding of you. Oh, then you're slandering me. Loren jabbed a finger at her. You just admitted it. She held his hand to stop him, preventing him from grabbing another bag of chips. I didn't. You're slandering me. You admitted it. You're slandering me. Say no more. Don't think that because you're holding my hand, I'll forgive you. Where's my lawyer? I'm suing you for defamation. There aren't lawyers in the magical world. Still, I'm suing you for defamation. The group bought everything they might need for the journey, including the fishing gear, and exchanged some dollars. Over the next few days, Hermione made Loren finish his Transfiguration and Charms homework. They left History of Magic until later. Hermione argued that after attending the International Confederation of Wizards, they might gain new insights. Grandpa Bates bought tickets for a luxury cruise. They would enter the country by proper channels and didn't need passports. Preparations were done. All that remained was departure. New York, Brooklyn. The most populous of the 5 boroughs, some called it an immigrant melting pot. It housed many newcomers. Some belonged, others were just passing through. In a rundown low-rise block, every door was bolted. The neighborhood was quieter than the dead of night, so quiet it felt hollow. It had once been the cheapest rental area, popular with newcomers. Now agents hardly recommended it. Over the past 2 years, strange tenants had moved in one after another. They never socialized, never went out at night. On full moon nights, there were eerie noises, the sound of things being smashed or of walls being clawed at. Some neighbors heard wolves howling. Rumors said these strange tenants kept wolves. People guessed they might be drug dealers or cultists. When asked, agents were evasive. In a shadowed corner house at the southwest end of the block, a thin, lively young man lay on the table, one eye squinted, inspecting a fist-sized mud ball in front of him. Remus, are you sure this is Wolfsbane potion? Call me John. John Moon, over here, Lupin mumbled, staring at the mud ball with as much skepticism as the young man. He wasn't entirely sure either. Snape had given it to him before leaving. It shouldn't be a prank. Jimmy, Remus's werewolf acquaintance, had a steady job once, cleaning up animal waste at a wizarding pet shop owned by his uncle. When he transformed on the full moon, the uncle would lock him in a beast cage, so any mysterious injuries could be blamed on the animals. With that family support, Jimmy had kept a childlike, easygoing manner instead of turning paranoid and bitter like some other werewolves. Last year, after the anti-werewolf legislation, Jimmy's uncle wanted him to register with the ministry. Jimmy refused and left home after a fight. When Lupin arrived in the States, he sought out Jimmy and, with his help, had infiltrated the local werewolf community. It's an improved wolfsbane, Lupin said reasonably. 1 dose lasts 6 months. Don't chew it. You call this 1 dose? Jimmy glared. This could be used for baseball. It's improved. Whoever improved it should be in Azkaban. Lupin nodded solemnly. Agreed, but eat it now. What about you? I'm an animagus. I don't need it. Jimmy's face fell. Where were you last year? You learned animagus, got improved wolfsbane, and roasted chicken legs. Lots of them. I know, Lupin nodded. Next full moon is in a week. Take it now, and you can eat as many roasted legs as you want then. Is it really about the chicken legs? Are you taking it or not? Reluctantly, Jimmy picked up the baseball-shaped wolfsbane and shoved it into his mouth. Ugh! He swallowed whole, without chewing. I think I'm full. He stopped as the ball began to dissolve in his stomach. A viscous, cold liquid seeped out, and Jimmy belched. A foul scent rose through his throat into his nose. With a werewolf's sensitive snout, his face went green. His eyes and brows twisted, his nose wrinkled, and his mouth pulled down as if he might transform right there. He thrashed, and his skin flushed from green to red before paling. Lupin watched the twitching, then, concerned, asked, "Ah, are you all right?" Jimmy lay weakly on the table and raised his hand in a locally learned crude greeting, 4 fingers bent into his palm with only the middle finger extended. Half an hour later, he recovered enough to sit at the table with Lupin. They produced steaming roasted chicken legs from a backpack. Jimmy glanced at the pack and then at the food, wisely not asking questions. "Tell me about the werewolves here." Jimmy swallowed and sighed contentedly. There are 2 main groups. One group are natives. Their leader's Taylor Lautner. They're united. One of the younger ones says they didn't originally live here, did carpentry and painting near the border, and only recently moved in. They've got savings. Expired bread and milk can still fill them up. Last winter, they even gave us clothes. The other lot are like us, refugees, and they're more loosely organized. Fenrir Greyback gathered a bunch of restless men who go rob muggles. No, as you know, they call them muggles here, stealing their money and food. Those who won't work with him end up doing black market jobs. After a pause, Jimmy went back to the chicken legs. Lupin sketched the community's outline in his head. Fenrir's involvement meant something darker was pulling strings, probably Voldemort. Lupin's next move was to win over those hungry for stability. Besides Jimmy, some local werewolves might be open to contact. "Won't their robbing be noticed by the American Magical Congress?" Lupin asked. "The horrors of the Magical Congress are swamped. The International Confederation of Wizards is about to start. This place is mad. Muggle robberies are common." Jimmy scratched his head, then remembered he hadn't washed his hair in months and put his hand down. Besides, they don't use magic when they steal, so it's harder to track. Lupin glanced at his own head and thought better of scratching. It's even messier than Snape's mop. "Who's Snape?" Jimmy asked. "Never mind." Lupin waved it off. "Can you get me in touch with Taylor Lautner? I want to meet him." "I've only spoken to one of the younger ones," Jimmy admitted, "but I'll try." 395. Board the ship. Set sail. London, Southampton. Outside the city, the great commercial port lay bright and busy. Moored at the quay was a huge white cruise liner, the Queen Elizabeth II, its gross tonnage over 70,000, its hull nearly 300 meters long. The funnel, black with orange-red protective plates along the sides and 2 thin black stripes, rose like a chimney above the black and white hull. The ship's simple lines made the colors elegant rather than dull. Its sheer size gave it an air of authority. Rumor had it the liner was older than Loren and Hermione, that it had been through wars, terrorist scares, even stories of ghosts. Those legends, of course, helped justify the ticket price. Grandpa Bates led them through the waiting room to be checked in. They walked along a transparent gangway, stepped over a carpet embroidered with Queen Elizabeth, and entered the ship's hotel-like interior. Mozart's Symphony No. 1 drifted from the lobby. Staff guided them quickly to their rooms, a family suite with a living room, balcony, private bathroom, and 4 bedrooms, one for the Granger couple and one apiece for the other 3. After they had stowed luggage and toiletries, the group regrouped in the living room. Bates and Monica were leafing through the cruise brochure while Wendell fidgeted, desperate to explore but lacking an excuse. Loren stood with a bag of potato chips, crunching without expression. "I just saw portraits of lots of famous people in the corridors. Walt Disney, Charlie Chaplin," Hermione said, pushing open a white-framed window. The moist sea air came rushing in. The ship hadn't left port yet. Bold seagulls hopped along the railings, and when people approached, flapped away and landed a short distance off, cawing as if mocking 2-legged creatures that could not fly. Wendell leaned over the rail for a look, then pouted when he realized it wasn't a good spot for fishing and backed away. Loren munched chips, machine-like. Hermione leaned against the rail, inhaled the salty breeze, exhaled slowly, and smiled in the sunshine. "They say this ship was requisitioned as a troop transport during the Falklands War," she said. Bates, reclining on the sofa, paused and rifled through the brochure's historical notes. Loren continued crunching. Hermione reached into his bag, pinched a handful of crushed chips, and crunched them with him. Loren's face softened only slightly. He scowled theatrically. I crushed the chips to warn the manufacturers. Why do you buy them and make me eat them? Final verdict, no changes, Hermione said, firm and cold. Damn it, Loren protested. This is a dictatorship. If you become Minister for Magic one day, you'll be a tyrant. I'll be the first to rebel. Hermione grabbed another handful of crumbs and crunched. She could have argued forever, and he would have acted outraged and then enlightened her with some made-up scheme about resisting her rule, so she let him. Eventually, the chips dwindled. Loren tossed the empty bag in the bin and joined Hermione at the railing, watching the seagulls. Suddenly he asked, without warning, "What do you think a seagull's life is for?" Hermione blinked. "What? To go to the docks and get fries." "Huh?" Loren shrugged, disappointed. "Never mind. You don't understand seagulls. You only care about yourself." Hermione turned away, expressionless. The sea was calm. Blue sky and blue water met at the horizon, distinguishable by hue. The Queen Elizabeth II eased out of the port and set a steady transatlantic course. The bow cut the deep blue, throwing up sheets of froth. The ship's mass made it feel as stable as land. There was barely any roll. After a short rest in their rooms, they began to explore. Monica wanted to scout restaurants. The lowest public decks housed crew areas and service spaces. The atrium level held entertainment, galleries, theaters, a casino, and luxury boutiques. Above were themed restaurants and bars, opening onto a central space that resembled a stage. There were 15 restaurants altogether, buffets, and a number of specialty, paid venues. Visible counters offered pizza, bacon, fried rice, sashimi. Above the accommodation deck sat the open promenade deck. "We'll split up," Wendell announced seriously. "Monica, Hermione, you two scope out the restaurants. Bates, Loren, and I will check the outer decks and see what the ship's management is like in case of an emergency." Bates and Loren exchanged a brief, knowing look. Hermione took her mother's hand and regarded them with unblinking eyes. Monica pursed her lips. "Don't bother looking for fishing spots. The ship doesn't stop during the voyage, and you're not allowed to fish." Wendell scowled. "What fishing? I don't know what you mean." Go, Monica said. "Be back in an hour. We'll have dinner together." "Got it." Wendell took Bates's hand and tugged Loren along, striding to the deck without another glance. "Didn't they say fishing's forbidden?" Bates asked as they walked. "You wouldn't understand," Wendell said solemnly. "Some sailors fish anyway. Rules don't stop everything. Maybe we can join them." They climbed to the outer deck. The ship had been at sea long enough that no land was visible, only an endless blue where sky and sea almost met. The sun hung high, scattering gold across the waves so that each ripple glittered. In scenery like that, it felt as if your chest widened to embrace the ocean. Loren and Bates leaned on the rail and watched in silence. Wendell, however, grew more disappointed. The ship's management was strict, and real fishing spots were nowhere to be found. "In that case, we might as well have flown," Wendell muttered. "A plane takes a few hours, 5 days on a boat." He brightened for a moment. "They say out past the coast you can find migrating schools. You drop a line, and you don't even need bait. I wanted to try out my new reel." Loren almost laughed. "You bought a reel to fish," he said, teasing. Bates patted Wendell's shoulder and smiled. They trailed back through the ship. Wendell resigned himself to no fishing for the next 5 days and collapsed onto the sofa, sighing. Monica sat beside him and put an arm around his shoulders. "It's all right," she said, gentle beyond her usual tone. "We all agreed to a cruise. It's more relaxing." Loren's eyes widened. "I didn't know you could be like that, Wendell," he teased. Later, on the balcony, Hermione folded the in-flight newspaper, and Loren noticed the masthead. "The New York Ghost." "New York Ghost," he said. "An American wizarding paper," Hermione replied, separating a stack. "I had the manager of Flourish and Blots buy me a bound volume before we left. I wanted to catch up on American magical news." Loren read aloud the headline that Dorothy had pointed to. "Albus Dumbledore, Chief Wizard of the Wizengamot, arrives in New York. International Confederation of Wizards to convene." The article outlined the conference's timing, participant nations, attending intelligent magical beings, and possible agenda items. Other pages ran recent international magical headlines. the British ministry's ambiguous stance on werewolves and the potential fallout, rising levels of exposure risk in 1994, and debates over whether wizards should reveal themselves, the 30th anniversary of the prohibition on private breeding and rearing of magical creatures, and musings on whether the Football World Cup was a parody of the Quidditch World Cup. The New York Ghost's reporting felt crisper than the Daily Prophet's. Loren finished his bundle, as Hermione had already read the rest. Outside, the sun dipped slowly toward the horizon, gilding the water and throwing an orange glow across the sky. Hermione propped her chin on her hand, bathed in the afterglow. "Do you think Professor Lupin is all right?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Loren admitted. He glanced at the page about werewolves in Hermione's hands. "Voldemort must have schemes, but the minister doesn't believe he's returned," Hermione said. "If Voldemort stirs werewolves up at the conference, the magical community could ostracize them. Professor Lupin's life would become even harder." "Have a little faith in Dumbledore," Loren said, nudging her playfully. "Voldemort hasn't been resurrected, but Dumbledore's alive and well." Hermione wrinkled her nose at him, then let out a small smile. In the other room, Monica called, "Loren! Hermione! Come in! Dinner's ready!" "Coming," Loren answered, then turned one last time to look at the sea. The setting sun set the horizon ablaze in gold and orange. 396. Today is also Professor Granger. The Queen Elizabeth II slid slowly across the Atlantic. On a calm, empty stretch of sea, with no islands or shoreline to mark progress, the ship might have seemed to stand still, if not for the white wake and froth trailing behind it. By the second day out of port, having been at sea for more than a dozen hours, Loren felt the view lose its initial brilliance. The novelty had dulled into boredom, like plain whole wheat bread with nothing to spread on it. Entertainment on board was thin unless you were old enough for the bars and casinos. There was a small pool and a tiny playground in the atrium, but Loren found the water unclean and the equipment childish. The Grangers and Bates enjoyed opera and often attended performances, but Loren and Hermione weren't of that bent. The grown-ups simply felt dull to them. The one comfort was the food, especially the after-dinner ice cream. In the open-air tea lounge, a piano murmured under the sea breeze, and stray seabirds occasionally dipped over the tables, prompting young girls and elegant ladies to wave bread in the air. Conversations flitted from whether fries with ketchup might be preferable to plain rolls to last night's lively dance floor. Loren sat with a caramel latte and watched Hermione across the table. Her brow was slightly furrowed, her fair face tilted in concentration. She was bent over arithmancy homework. Professor Victor's assignments were brutal, too much even for the top pupil in their year. Loren watched her for a moment, then said, "I have a question." She answered without looking up. "Can you dance?" "A little, I guess," she replied, still writing. Loren blinked. "You can actually dance? Is that a problem?" Hermione asked, pausing mid-formula. She looked up, and a mischievous smile spread across her face, as if she'd caught sight of something deliciously interesting. In Hermione's eyes, Loren was a sort of genius: transfiguration, alchemy, potions, even financial speculation. There seemed nothing he couldn't do. Her recent discovery of the wonders in a remarkable book had only made her feel like she could never quite catch up. If only he wasn't lazy, she privately thought, then the top spot in their year wouldn't be hers alone. She capped her pen, snapped her notebook shut, and sat up straight, assuming the air of a professor. "I'm not very good at it either," she confessed, "but ever since my kindergarten graduation ball, my parents have taken me to all sorts of dances. The more I watched, the more I picked up." "Many dances?" Loren prompted. "So many." Hermione nodded solemnly then, as if unburdening a grievance, began to list them. Kindergarten graduation balls, my parents' colleagues and friends, birthday balls, promotion balls, Christmas balls, bachelor parties before weddings, housewarmings. There's always some occasion for a ball. At those events, you couldn't read, you couldn't watch films, you couldn't eat too loudly or talk too loudly. When I was little, I hated them. She glanced at Loren, embarrassed at the confession, then resumed her academic composure. "Still, my father invited me to dance occasionally. I know a bit of waltz and jazz, so I can teach you." She lifted her chin, a triumphant note in her clear voice. "Want to learn?" Loren's expression flickered. He hadn't been taught any of these things in his 2 lifetimes and had assumed the reclusive Miss Granger was as much a novice as he. Now he realized she'd learned by immersion. If he didn't pick it up now, next semester would be awkward. He nodded slowly, trying to look unruffled. Let's give it a try. Hermione couldn't hide her smile. She sprang up, grabbed her notebook, and tugged Loren toward their suite. The adults were in the theater watching Macbeth, so they had the room to themselves. She sat him on the sofa and took up a lecturing posture. Let's start with the waltz. It's the most common and representative dance, she began, then faltered. She'd intended to launch into the history and stylistic development of the dance, but that was beyond her real knowledge. Her practical experience was limited to muddling through on the floor with Wendell at gatherings, where polite applause had been mistaken for skill. She checked Loren's face as if to make sure she hadn't overreached, then waved her wand. History aside, I'll just lead you through it a few times, and you'll get it. Is that so? Loren said, partly doubtful, partly hopeful. Hermione reached out and hauled him up, rearranged the sofas with a flick of her wand to clear the center of the room, and assumed the teaching role in earnest. First, the basic hold. She demonstrated, sliding one hand behind his upper arm, placing his right hand on her back beneath the left shoulder blade, guiding his arm with her left hand and raising his other hand with her right. It was not the low grasp Loren had expected. It sat higher and softer. The faint scent of Hermione reached him, and for a moment his thoughts walked off the page. Then the box step. Watch your feet, she continued, her voice bright with the pleasure of instructing. Hermione moved across from him, demonstrating the steps, oblivious to any formal classroom decorum. Loren's mind kept tripping over details, how close to stand, the rhythm, the little rise and fall. Finally, she brought him to the last move, face to face, and gave a satisfied nod. By the end, Hermione's forehead was damp with sweat. She rubbed her aching arms and looked at him expectantly. So, did you get it? Not at all, Loren said flatly. Hermione blinked, genuinely surprised. How can that be? The men's steps are far simpler than the women's, and I only taught the basics. She retraced her instructions in her head, then shrugged and pulled him back into the center of the room. Practice, she decided, solved everything. They went over the hold and the box step again and again. Her technique might have been a little rough. She had never been formally trained, but she had energy, patience, and a knack for making the motions make sense. The lesson, if not flawless, was enjoyable. One unnamed student afterward would have had nothing but praise. That night, in the fantastical books library, Loren gently put his arm around Professor Granger's waist, and the two of them began to waltz. They twirled and glided to the soothing music, their steps light and their movements fluid, far better than the clumsy practice from earlier in the day. From Flamel's more critical, professional point of view, however, their dancing was an eyesore. Hermione was confidently explaining incorrect technique, and Loren was unreservedly copying her. After watching for a while, Flamel decided to give them a proper lesson. The waltz originated in Bavaria and was introduced to the Viennese court in the 17th century, he said. At that time, noblewomen were captivated by this free, unrestrained dance. Later, the faster form came to be called the Viennese waltz. Hermione's spin slowed. She tucked the historical note away in her mind, leaned in toward Loren, and whispered, "Slow the box step down. If you can't remember it, just press your toes against mine and move together." "Okay," Loren replied softly, lowering his voice. Flamel heard this unorthodox tip and let out a long, exasperated breath before continuing more patiently. Nicholas and Perenelle once lived in Vienna. Perenelle adored the dance. The waltz is simple and flowing, which made it easy for many to pick up just by watching. It suited the shifting customs of the time, and so became very popular. It's now one of the most representative dances. Hermione didn't stop swaying. In her head, she decided this was one of those facts she didn't need to memorize in detail. An impression would do. As a 3/4 time dance, its basic step is 1 step per beat, 3 steps per measure. There are also variations with 2 or 4 steps per measure. She drifted away from the lecture, following the music. Loren hardly heard Flamel at all, silently matching Hermione's rhythm. Immersed in their private world, one daring to teach and the other daring to learn, they both enjoyed the moment. They thought they vaguely heard Flamel grumbling that their posture was wrong, but his scolding quickly cooled into a dry list of corrections that sounded almost like a distant echo. After all, the library was vast, the music echoed, and none of it felt urgent. One waltz after another, and an hour later, Hermione finished the dance lesson feeling content. Good student, good professor, she thought happily. Loren, coming out of his reverie, turned his head to look for Flamel, but there was no sign of him. Perhaps it had all been a hallucination. Later, the five of them dined slowly and leisurely. Unlike the buffet upstairs, this restaurant served set menus that had to be reserved and paid for in advance. You picked your main dishes, told the staff of any dietary restrictions 3 hours before, and the kitchen arranged the meal accordingly. Since it was their last night on the ship, Bates had booked the place. A violin's mellow strains floated through the room, coaxing people to lower their voices. Silverware made soft, bright clinks. The pre-meal bread and butter were unremarkable. The appetizer course featured duck liver pâté, frog legs in parsley sauce, and a salad tossed with fermented cheese. Mains included ribeye with red wine reduction and black truffle pasta. By the end of the meal, everyone felt their belts a little tighter. After dinner, Bates and the Granger couple hurried off to see the last act of Macbeth, leaving Loren and Hermione to stroll the ship on their own. They found themselves again at the open-air tea lounge. Few guests remained. A pale yellow lamp cast a quiet glow over the space. The cool sea breeze smelled damp and salty, a scent they'd grown used to over the past few days. The ship sliced through the water. White waves crashed and hissed, a soft, constant white noise. Hermione tilted her face up and breathed in the maritime night with satisfaction. The muffled chatter and music from inside the ship reached them like a memory, filtered and distant. It felt, for a moment, as if the world belonged only to the two of them. Loren spotted a gramophone on the counter and gave a small wave. The needle dropped onto the black vinyl. As the Blue Danube poured out in soft swells, he bowed slightly to Hermione. "My lady, may I have this dance?" Hermione smiled and offered her hand. The 10,000-ton ship parted the waves. The lamp's light stretched and braided their shadows together, and for a while the vast Atlantic seemed to hush. There were still 30 minutes left before the theater show ended. Loren and Hermione sat opposite each other at a small round table on the balcony. He held a quill and pretended to be working on his arithmancy homework, looking serious, but a closer look showed he was easily distracted, his eyes glazing over and a strange smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. He stopped mid-stroke and glanced up to steal a look at Hermione. For her part, Hermione's small face was tense as she concentrated on her own notes. Her brows were slightly knit, her eyelashes fluttered, her eyes looked like they held the sea. Beneath her fine nose, her lips were pressed together. Normally a little thin and slightly cool in expression, tonight they were faintly red and swollen, any aloofness washed away. Even with her lips pinched and her face tight, she looked adorable. She kept silent. If one ignored the quill that wasn't actually leaving any ink, Loren might have believed she was studying. Hermione stared hard at the letters on the page until some of them seemed unfamiliar. After a moment, they seemed to blur, then to sway, splitting into several, linking hands, and beginning to spin, waltzing across the paper. The salty sea breeze kept bringing her back to the tea lounge. She shook her head sharply and cleared the images from her mind, then looked up. Loren was watching her, unblinking. "What are you staring at?" She tried to sound firmer. Loren's gaze lingered on her lips a beat longer. "Admiring the scenery," he said. Hermione immediately shrank inward. Loren's teasing made him chuckle twice, and then he switched topics. "Besides the International Confederation of Wizards, when we get to New York, we should go see some of the famous sights." "What sights?" she asked. "The Statue of Liberty, Times Square, the Empire State Building, and the Golden Gate Bridge, the one always getting blown up in the movies." "There's no Golden Gate Bridge in New York." "What? The Golden Gate Bridge is in San Francisco." "Oh, you're so annoying. Do you always have to correct me?" The cruise ship docked in New York Harbor at 10 in the morning. Loren and the others filed off the gangway in an orderly line. The immigration counter was busy but not jammed, people from many countries filling the queue. Before Loren's group could get in line, a broad-shouldered black man in what looked like an immigration uniform stepped up to them. "Excuse me, folks," he said, smiling in a way that was meant to be friendly but came out a little too eager. The uniform sat oddly on him. "The sneakoscope went off for you. Wizards, right?" Loren and Hermione exchanged a puzzled look. The Granger couple and Bates looked even more bewildered, watching the man warily. "Hey, relax," he said, waving both hands to calm them. He turned and pointed down a side corridor. "I'm the guide for wizards who enter by. Muggle means. Call me Mike. Don't start with the whole so many Americans are named Mike thing. Yes, I know. I work for the Department of Magical Security Management. I just started reception duty last month." Loren observed him while Mike prattled on, noting the man's less than impressive magic presence compared to a Hogwarts professor. He motioned for the others to follow. Mike led them into a bright, spacious reception room. The lights were crisp and a little hard on the eyes. On the table sat bottled water and canned coffee. Several colorful sneakoscopes hung on the walls. As Loren and Hermione walked past, the sneakoscopes flashed green. When the Grangers and Bates passed, the devices stayed dim. The group's meaning was quickly obvious. Wendell craned his neck, peering at the glass globes as if he might catch the magic hiding inside, but of course, he saw nothing. Mike showed them to a seating area and took the main chair, beginning his routine. "Could I see your Muggle IDs? Since you came through ordinary means, you should have them ready." Bates produced 3 IDs from his bag and handed them over. Mike barely looked, just a glance at the photos and details, lingering a second longer over Loren and Hermione's. "Loren Morgan, Hermione Granger," he said, checking the faces. "British, right?" "Yes," Hermione confirmed. "First time in New York?" Mike asked. "Yes," Loren nodded. "Any potions in your luggage?" Loren hesitated, then said, "No." Mike raised an eyebrow as if he suspected the answer wasn't entirely honest, but he didn't insist on a search. "Fantastic beasts?" "Absolutely not," Loren said firmly. Hanch and Crookshanks were staying at home. The bedroom window had been left unlocked, and there was still food in the backyard tree. Given how clever those two were, they'd manage fine. Mike gave a lopsided chuckle and handed back the IDs. Regulation from the ministry. Years ago, one of your countrymen brought an entire zoo over, and we had a right mess on our hands." Wendell and Bates listened with interest, realizing the line between wizards and muggles in this country was closer than they had expected. Mike reached behind him and pulled out a parchment, spreading it on the table. "Last thing, register your wands." He pointed to a tiny dot on the paper. "Just touch that and put out a little bit of magic. A tiny bit. Last week some reckless kid practically burned my registry. His parents were Aurors from your ministry, by the way." Loren and Hermione exchanged a look. Following his instruction, they each touched the dot. The moment the wand tips brushed the page, a dark blot spread like ink and handwriting began to appear beneath it. Loren Morgan, Applewood, Phoenix Tail Feather. Hermione Granger, Vinewood, Dragon Nerve. Mike folded the parchment away with a satisfied grin. "All set. Welcome to New York." Down in the basement of the Woolworth building in downtown Manhattan, an interrogation room was brightly lit. Keeping muggles in the basement for questioning, away from the stranger things upstairs, saved the memory charmers a lot of work. It looked like a walking wolf, or like a zombie that hadn't finished decaying, a plumber in a yellow uniform told them, his voice tight with panic. He cradled a cup of coffee the building staff had given him. "I saw it down in the Brooklyn pipes. Teeth, sharp teeth, and wet fur." It had happened 3 nights earlier, but describing the scene made him shiver all over again. He wanted to say the thing must have been some pharmaceutical experiment or a military bioweapon, but the men taking his statement worked for some government agency, and the words stuck in his throat. He told them everything in precise style, practical plumber's detail. 2 hours later, when he left the Woolworth building, Bob paused at the curb and stared back for a beat. He had walked out less than 5 minutes ago, but the structure of the pipes inside the building had already fled his memory. Odd for a man who always sized up pipework in new places. He couldn't remember the faces of the people who had questioned him either. "How strange," he muttered, and walked away. Inside the Woolworth building, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures held a meeting. Minister Nidander slammed his fist on the table. We must keep a close watch on whatever those werewolves in Brooklyn are doing. This is the third sighting this week, and we still don't know what's going on. Minister, we can't even be sure the things in the sewers are werewolves, the information officer said quickly. He looked through the reports as he spoke, trying to keep Nidander's fierce gaze from making him stumble. The times of the sightings don't line up, the officer reported. None of them happened on a full moon. By our understanding, a werewolf only transforms on the full moon night. And the descriptions don't fit normal werewolves, another voice added. Witnesses described them as motionless corpses, more like the Walking Dead. Also, when a werewolf dies, their magic fades and they revert to human form. That didn't happen here. The more details the officers laid out, the less the evidence added up. The leads tangled into contradictions and possibilities that only bred more questions. Nidander felt a cold knot of unease tighten in his gut, an instinct that something very bad was forming out of sight. All teams, he barked, slamming his hand down again. Starting today, 2 people from each team will begin round-the-clock stakeouts in the Brooklyn sewers. Report anything unusual immediately. Yes, Minister. They left the pier, took the hotel shuttle, checked in, had a light meal at the hotel restaurant, and bought extra towels and toiletries. Little things the Granger couple, both doctors, couldn't help fussing over. At the supermarket, the cashier picked up their accents and joked with Bates. By the time everything was done and they'd settled into the luxury suite, it was already 3 in the afternoon. Loren lay sprawled on the sofa, eyes fixed on the crystal chandelier overhead. After days on the sea, his body was still finding its balance. The shift from ocean blue to city steel felt jarring. Hermione sat beside him with a printed leaflet in her hands. The bottom bore the seal of the American Magical Congress. Do not use magic in front of muggles. If there is a risk of magical exposure, contact the American Magical Congress immediately. Phone 212-AH. You may also report in person at the reception window on the 3rd floor of the Woolworth building, she read aloud. When shopping in Muggle stores, please use Muggle currency. Gringotts-issued currency is not accepted in Muggle society. If a fantastic beast goes missing, please immediately use the wand lighting charm to alert authorities. You do not need to comply with secrecy treaty procedures. Hermione frowned, reading each line carefully. Comparing the first and last points, she sensed an inconsistency. Why do they tell us to contact the Congress immediately for any risk of magical exposure, but if a fantastic beast goes missing, they expect us to use magic at once to alert them? Why allow magic in one case and forbid it in another? Which one's considered more dangerous? Wendell leaned over to look. Hermione began to tell a tidy, fluent stream of stories about magical incidents she'd read or heard of, speaking in a clear, practiced way that made the room feel more familiar. Bates paced and checked every corner of the suite. The old soldier was restless in a strange country. Come eat some fruit, Monica called, returning through the door with a plate of washed, sliced fruit from room service. The Granger father and daughter looked up from their conversation. Bates, who had been poking around, came back into the sitting area. They gathered around the plate to talk about the next few days' plans. Hermione reached out and handed Loren a slice of orange. He bit into it, the sweet juice bright and sharp in his mouth. Simple comfort after a long trip. 399. Encountering Miss Beadle by chance. There was still a week before the International Confederation of Wizards convened, and for the next few days, Loren and his companions took their time exploring the city. New York's public transportation left much to be desired. The subway's crowded cars and tangle of lines might have been bearable, but the damp, aging platforms, the half-asleep homeless sprawled on the stairs, and the occasional sharp smell of urine finally put Loren over the edge. He had the hotel manager rent a 5-seater car the next morning. Bates sniffed and muttered, "Even the sheepfold on my ranch is cleaner than this." Manhattan lived up to its reputation as a concrete jungle. Most pedestrians hurried past in suits and ties, and the sidewalks were filled with people. At the same time, it was also where they saw the most homeless. Dazed men and women sitting in dirty corners with bags at their feet and a cup out for spare change. Roosevelt Island, only a river away, felt like another world. No skyscrapers, no neon, no filthy streets or fat pigeons. Instead, there were modest 20th century apartment blocks, small shops, and some rather aggressive geese. Loren even spotted a few wizards among the day trippers, relaxed and clearly tourists themselves. 2 days before the Confederation, they visited the Museum of Modern Art. Loren and his friends stood before Van Gogh's Starry Night, Monet's Water Lilies, and other paintings they had only ever seen in books or on TV. Wendell, no, Loren, spent a long time in front of the canvases. Even Bates, usually indifferent to such things, stood nodding thoughtfully, his weathered face taking on a rare look of quiet appreciation. Hermione walked beside Loren, chattering as she supplied art historical context. Van Gogh depicts the night sky as a living, moving thing with exaggerated technique, she began. The whole canvas is swallowed by surging blues and greens. The whirling nebulae make the sky restless. It's almost hallucinatory. Hermione recited in a steady, practiced voice, as if a little encyclopedia had taken human form. Loren raised a finger and stopped in front of a framed abstract piece. He adopted a serious, listening posture. "Shh," he said. "Don't speak. Just feel what the work gives you." Hermione hesitated, then blurted, "That's not. This is just an escape plan map." "No, you don't understand," Loren said, smiling slightly. "A person's identity is tied to their place, and so is a work of art. Since this is framed and hung in a museum, it belongs to the same world as Starry Night and Water Lilies, and that makes it art." "Nonsense," Hermione rolled her eyes. "Weren't those things you were just—" Loren relaxed and stretched. "I admit those paintings are beautiful and have a certain aesthetic, but all those long interpretations are unnecessary. You know, the paintings in Hogwarts are far more entertaining, especially Silly Barnabas." He trailed off. His gaze had fixed on a blonde reporter in the crowd snapping photos. Hermione followed his line of sight and exclaimed, "Miss Rita Skeeter?" They took seats at a cafe booth beside the museum. The waiter guided them through the menu as Loren ordered a mocha, Hermione a macchiato, and then, eyes on the reporter, Loren ordered an iced Americano for Rita and nudged Hermione. Rita looked stiff with nerves. She had a long, complicated history with Hogwarts. She had infiltrated the school a year earlier to dig into the Chamber of Secrets story, been discovered by Loren, trapped in a bottle, interrogated by Snape in McGonagall's presence, and forced to reveal secrets that could have ruined her. She'd been kept on at the school as an assistant for a while and had reached a deal with Dumbledore. She would gather information for him, and in return, the school would keep her misdeeds quiet. Remembering that arrangement seemed to calm her. She lifted her chin and sniffed. "Don't think you can threaten me again with the animagus matter," she said. "My friends at the publishing house told me your Professor McGonagall registered students as animagi. I've already completed my animagus registration with the American Magical Congress, and I've kept my end of the bargain with Dumbledore." Loren and Hermione studied the reporter. She looked different from the thinner assistant they remembered. Rita seemed a little rounder, her blonde hair set in stiff, elaborate curls, narrow glasses perched on her nose, bright red nails tapping the table. Loren said gently, "We have no intention of threatening you, Miss Skeeter. This meeting is a coincidence. We were just surprised to see a wizarding journalist in a Muggle art museum." Rita smirked. "I'm working on a special for the New York Times." She flitted her attention to her painted nails. The tone of her voice carried a trace of pride. When the waiter set a glass of iced Americano in front of her, she lifted it, took a small sip as if used to the taste, then set it down. "In wizarding circles, that paper would be called a Muggle newspaper," Loren said, curious. Rita shrugged. "Suit yourself. The Times is non-wizarding. Millions of people read it each day. My angle is novel, and the pay is good." They sipped their drinks in silence. It struck Loren as odd. Rita Skeeter, once openly contemptuous of Muggles, now blending effortlessly into Muggle life. After a moment, Rita tucked her nails away, took another sip, and cleared her throat. "Anything else?" she asked. "If not, I should get back to work." They both wanted the information Dumbledore had asked her to gather, but as students there was little they felt they could press. They shook their heads. "For Hogwarts' sake," Rita said brightly, "leave New York as soon as you can. Don't even think about going to the Confederation." "What do you mean?" Loren and Hermione exchanged puzzled looks. I don't understand. Rita shrugged. This winter, a lot of werewolves froze to death in Brooklyn, and many homeless people froze to death in Central Park. That happens every year. But the strange thing is their bodies disappeared. Disappeared? Hermione and Loren echoed. Yes, bodies from funeral homes and graves were gone. Rita's expression turned serious. The Muggle authorities suspect illegal organ trafficking or experiments on the homeless. The werewolf leaders think someone's harvesting werewolf corpses for magical materials, but from a reporter's gut, the two cases might be linked. Loren's expression grew thoughtful. Werewolves and Muggles, he thought of Bates and the way the magical and non-magical communities could overlap. Rita continued, voice low. The American Magical Congress recorded sightings of werewolf bodies in the Brooklyn sewer system. They also acquired a batch of swooping evil venom. Rita looked straight at them. New York could become chaotic. The mention of swooping evil venom made both of them sit up. The venom could erase short-term memories. If the American Magical Congress was buying it, they must be preparing for a serious risk of magical exposure. In a city wired with cameras, phones, and global news networks, a large-scale exposure in a metropolis of millions would not stay secret. Aurors would have to spend weeks erasing memories. Entire ministries could be busy keeping the statute of secrecy intact. Rita ignored the thoughts racing through their heads and closed her Louis Vuitton handbag. I'm leaving after I finish today's reporting. Once more, either get out of the city or find shelter with Headmaster Dumbledore. Well then, see you next year at Hogwarts, she said with a practiced flourish, paid at the counter like any Muggle professional, and melted into the stream of pedestrians. Loren, do you think something will happen in New York? Hermione asked, worry in her voice. Loren watched Rita disappear into the crowd and shook his head. Almost every ministry in the world will be at the Confederation. There will be Aurors everywhere, and Dumbledore will be presiding. I don't think anything catastrophic and irreversible will happen. Hermione let out a small relieved breath, but Loren's next words tightened that relief. I do worry that any clash could spill over and affect ordinary people. July 1994. Outside the Museum of Modern Art, traffic coiled and uncoiled like living things. People flowed in all directions. That evening back at the hotel, Hermione eagerly dove into the library's records. After checking Flamel's notes, she began combing through a century of magical incidents in New York. In the bright reading room, she sat at a desk, quiet and focused. Across a bookshelf, Loren floated two conjured bodies in midair for examination. Both were middle-aged men. One body simulated a common victim of hypothermia, a half-smile frozen on his face, skin pale with a bluish tinge where clothing left limbs exposed, goose flesh visible, hands swollen and purplish. The other was a werewolf corpse caught in an unnatural state, its bestial features flickering as the aberrant magic that had animated them slowly faded. Fur surged under the skin, then receded, sharp teeth protruded and then slipped back. The corpse's form shifted between wolfish and human in a grotesque, repeated cycle. Had someone preserved the werewolf characteristics? Loren studied the werewolf carefully, turning it with deft motions. Combining his knowledge of anatomy with alchemical principles, he theorized that a circulating magical pathway, like a runic circuit, could slow the dissipation of the aberrant magic. He traced a faint glow beneath the werewolf's skin. The light followed the major arteries of the limbs and formed a closed runic pattern. Then he tapped the heart, channeling a trickle of magical energy into the circuit. The body stilled, its werewolf features held in place. Still, Loren detected leakage. At that rate, the werewolf traits could be maintained for about half a month. But Rita had said these bodies had been preserved for more than 6 months. How had they kept the magic from fading for so long? Hermione, fingers flipping through yellowing pages, found a detailed entry for December 1926. Newt Scamander, sent by Obscurus Books to compile fantastic beasts and where to find them, had arrived in New York that year. Through a series of mishaps, several magical creatures had escaped. Newt worked with a female Auror from the American ministry to recover them. At the same time, Gellert Grindelwald had been stirring trouble, maneuvering between factions within the American ministry and a group called the Purifiers to hunt an Obscurial of terrible power. The Obscurial's rampage, stoked by Grindelwald, had devastated half the city. The American wizarding community rallied and drove Grindelwald back, but the conflict had exposed the magical world to muggles. To prevent a full public revelation, Newt Scamander had diluted swooping evil venom into the rain, erasing the short-term memories of those who witnessed the chaos. Nicholas Flamel, who had been involved and knew Newt, recorded even more detail in his notes. Hermione paused over one unfamiliar word in Flamel's account and whispered, "Purifiers?" Flamel was not surprised that Hermione had been able to trace the purifiers back to the 1926 New York magic exposure incident. Nicholas's notes had devoted far too much ink to the fanatical group calling itself Second Salem. Their origins go back a long way. In the bright, empty library, Flamel waved a hand. From behind a solid wooden shelf, Loren, who had been watching a projection of a Dementor's corpse, saw a thick book tremble on his right, slide slowly out of its slot, and fly toward Flamel. Loren dispelled the corpse projection and stepped beside Hermione to watch. Flamel pushed the book forward. It hovered in midair, covers opening wide as the pages flipped. Dim light and shadow spilled into the room from the ancient tome. In the 17th century, the book's voice seemed to say, European settlers were just beginning to pour into North America, including pockets of wizarding communities. Loren and Hermione leaned forward, watching the book paint a 17th-century North American colonial landscape in light and shadow. The United States did not yet exist. There was no unified wizarding government and no single non-wizard authority. The land was a patchwork of colonial powers, immigrants, and ruthless wilderness bandits. Violence, murder, revenge, robbery was common and brutal. At that time, Flamel narrated, the wizarding presence in America was small, scattered, and hidden. They had no organized means of law enforcement. Bounty hunters from a dozen countries exploited that vacuum. Flamel's eyes glinted as he watched the projection. If you could get gold, whether by hunting notorious criminals in daylight or looting in the dark, you wouldn't spare anyone who could be traded for coin. Their cruelty struck terror into people. They became notorious. They called themselves purifiers. The book's pages showed shadowy figures in black robes, dragging victims with heavy packs and turning them over for gold coins. The coins bought weapons. The weapons fueled further slaughter until rivers of blood stained the scene. Loren and Hermione watched in silence. On a raw continent with no oversight, a wand's green light could be everything. Killing was simply part of life. As time passed, Flamel continued, the purifiers grew greedier and crueler. Far from any wizarding authority, many of them abandoned their missions and gave themselves over to cruelty. They craved blood and torture. By the late 17th century, the projection went on, purifier numbers were growing. In regions outside any wizarding jurisdiction, secrecy was poorly enforced, and some zealous members of the non-wizard population discovered signs of magic. They believed magic was demonic and that wizards were agents of the devil. Hermione and Loren's eyes narrowed. The witch hunts. To collect rewards, the purifiers started to sell their fellow wizards to religious zealots, Flamel said. Driven by profit, they lost all reason. Some even sold innocent muggles as wizards to fanatics. In 1692, he continued, Puritan judges in the Massachusetts colony publicly tried dozens of people accused of witchcraft, most of them women, and many were executed. History remembers that slaughter as the Salem witch trials. Wizard historians believe at least 2 of those Puritan judges were known purifiers acting out old feuds. Some of the victims were indeed witches. Many were ordinary muggles caught in a trial driven by greed and blood. Hermione's breath caught. She felt for the accused, those with magic, and the innocents who had been dragged to death without ever knowing the truth. Loren's face remained unreadable. The dim light of the projection reflected across his features. Flamel sighed. The Salem affair forced the wizarding community in North America to unite. In 1693, the American Magical Congress was formed, over a century before the Muggle Congress. The long-persecuted North American wizarding world began to write its own laws and establish communities, just as other nations had. Once they stabilized, the Congress began to pursue the purifiers who had instigated the trials and betrayed their kind. But many of the worst escaped capture and melted back into Muggle society. Some took Muggle spouses, If a child showed magical ability, they would abandon it, leaving only non-magical descendants to conceal their past. But that was not the end. Years of bloodletting had twisted many purifiers utterly. Expelled from the wizarding world, they grew to hate magic and passed that hatred to their children, an inheritance of belief that wizards must be eradicated. In the 1920s, Flamel said, a Muggle radical group, calling itself the New Salem Philanthropic Society, or Second Salem, threatened to expose and eliminate the wizarding community. They were behind the 1926 New York exposure incident. Flamel spoke with the calm detail of someone who had read, and in some cases witnessed, these tragedies. Nicholas's memory had chronicled them. "What a pathetic existence," Loren murmured. Hermione looked at him. "Pathetic? Children born with wizarding blood who awaken are abandoned. The non-magical children are taught twisted ideologies and spend their lives bound to lies they'll pass on. They never experience the wonder of magic. Even if magic were exposed, a memory charm can erase it all." Loren's voice was flat. "The American Magical Congress has had the means to dismantle Second Salem for years. They simply won't use magic against ordinary people. Without magic, the purifiers are pitiful and laughable." Mount Greylock Summit, Western Massachusetts. The mountaintop was remote. It was summer. Most of the students and many professors had left Ilvermorny, leaving the school hushier than usual. On the lawn, Professor Tom Gaunt stood pruning an overgrown shrub, oblivious to the woman beside him with her head bowed. Bellatrix Lestrange watched Lord Voldemort pick off a sprig of fresh green tea branch, bring it to his nose, and inhale. He seemed oddly domestic and monstrous at once. "It's amusing, isn't it, Massachusetts?" he said softly. 300 years ago, greedy wizards and wealthy muggles colluded to execute others. 300 years later, that scene will be performed again. No, transcended." A thin, insane smile split his face. The magical knowledge he'd gleaned from the basilisk's memories, combined with his own genius, had produced an unprecedented weapon: combat dementors. These constructs did not depend on the moon, felt no physical pain, and could carry lycanthropy. To shock the International Confederation of Wizards, he had even turned some muggles into dementors. "I cannot wait to hear them scream," he said faintly, suppressing a tremor. Bellatrix kept her eyes on the ground. A tiny insect crawled from the shrub and scuttled near his shoe, then fled as if terrified. "But Master Dumbledore," she began. Lord Voldemort snapped off another branch and tossed it into the bushes, almost disappointed. "I will draw him away," he said, "but it is a pity I shall not see the werewolves rampage through New York myself." "Master," Bellatrix said, loyal and cautious, "even if Dumbledore is lured away, the Aurors from the American Ministry, the escorting Aurors from other countries, and elite warriors from other sentient races will be at the conference. Those dementors will be dealt with quickly." "Do you expect those unintelligent corpses to change the battle's outcome?" he asked coldly. "What do you mean?" Bellatrix replied. His smile did not fade. "Tell me this. Before the dementors are fully dealt with, will any muggles be infected with lycanthropy? Will any Aurors be infected? Will any minister for magic be infected? What an interesting scene that will be." He drew another breath of the tea branch's scent and savored it. Down in the hotel garage, a sky-blue Ford Anglia gleamed under the lights. Bates was first to open the door, slide into the driver's seat, turn the key, and press the clutch. The engine hummed to life. "Let me see!" Wendell jumped into the passenger seat, eager. "The rental manager said this car's got special modifications. It's been driving around New York. I haven't had a chance to try it. Now I finally can." The three adults planned to drive to Baltimore for a road trip. Wendell wanted to test the car's tweaks. Outside the open door, Monica crouched down to stare directly into her daughter's face. "Hermione, are you sure there's nothing you want to tell me?" she asked. Hermione held her mother's gaze. Her neck muscles tensed. Speaking felt suddenly hard. "No, nothing." Loren glanced at her. "Why so nervous?" Hermione mumbled, partly to reassure herself, partly to placate Monica. "For the next few days, Loren and I are auditing the International Confederation of Wizards. We've seen most of New York's sights, so I thought you might enjoy a road trip to Baltimore. The hotel provides meals, the conference isn't far, and we have magic, so you don't need to worry." Loren's eyes widened a little. Monica put both hands on Hermione's shoulders, stepped around her, pulled Loren close, and whispered something in his ear. Loren nodded and replied a few quiet words. The little witch who had been listening looked from her mother to Loren, shoulders slumping in disappointment and anxiety. They had separated their parents from the truth to prevent the impending magical event from putting their families in danger. Hermione didn't know how Loren had convinced Grandpa Bates. She only knew she hadn't wanted her parents to worry, so she had lied. She strained her ears but heard nothing more. Loren finally promised, "Don't worry, I'll take good care of Hermione." Monica's expression softened. She ruffled Hermione's hair, opened the car door, and climbed into the back seat. As the Ford rolled out of the garage, Hermione tugged Loren's sleeve and asked quietly, "What did Mom tell you?" "Nothing," he said, "just to take good care of you." Hermione hesitated. "What did you tell Grandpa Bates?" "The truth." "Huh?" "Between family," Loren said seriously, his eyes clear even if dimmed by the events surrounding them. "What's the point of secrets? If one day I get into danger, would you want me to tell you everything or hide it and say nothing?" Hermione thought, then nodded. "Tell me." Loren stood on tiptoe and ruffled her hair. "Tell them truly when they get back, okay?" "Okay." Outside, the city's tall buildings shrank as the Ford Anglia eased into the suburbs. Monica could not keep curiosity down. "Mr. Bates, how did Loren persuade you to go on this trip?" she asked. Bates kept his eyes on the road. "He said there might be a magical terrorist attack in New York and told me to leave the city." "What?" Wendell, who had been studying the dashboard, looked up so suddenly he banged his head on the center console and clapped his hands over it, his voice trembling. "Turn around. Quick, turn around." Monica's lips thinned. Bates said nothing. He reached to switch on the car stereo, and a fast-paced rock song filled the interior.